We'll talk about what's happened with his court case as well. Basically, unconditional discharge there, saying justice has been done, off you go, not much more to see here. And we're talking about whether Britain is back under union control. Kemi Badenoch says that it's Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, but fronted by Keir Starmer, who Elon Musk, of course, says is a threat to Western democracy. Plenty to get our teeth into between 4 and 7.
There's a lot to get your teeth into before 7 there. It's interesting that, you know, and Big Rach, of course, is off to the Red Rach, as she may now be known.
Got a little red book.
Taking a fiscal leaf out of that book, perhaps. Or is she just coming back with a job lot of solar panels in her hand luggage? We will watch with interest. Peter Cardwell's next after the news, here on Talk at 4.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good evening. This is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Lots to discuss between now and 7, including Rachel Reeves, who's been accused of being missing in action. She's on her way to China, to talk about our economy. The markets are in turmoil and the pound is in free fall. What do you make of that? She says she wants new ideas for economic growth. Where's she going to get them from? Why doesn't she have the ideas herself? They've been in opposition for 14 years. Don't they know how to grow the economy? Labour bet the farm on growth. They said they wanted 2.5% growth. Now they're saying, how do we get it? Did they have a plan? Keir Starmer has stood by his claim that Liz Truss crashed the economy despite the legal action she's threatening against him. Kemi Badenoch says that the Labour Party is Jeremy Corbyn's party, but Keir Starmer is fronting it, and says that Britain's back under union control. We'll talk about that. We'll also say that to look at a survey that says that the majority of British people back a new grooming gang inquiry. We've been covering that story for over a week. Strong lines, strong opinions on that. Let me know what yours is. 0344 499 1000. We'll talk about farmers. We'll talk about Ed Miliband's gas problem. Yes, really, he has a wind problem as well. We'll talk about sport. We'll talk about ex-convicts and whether they're just as reliable as other staff. That's what the prisons minister said. Ex-convicts are just as reliable as other staff. Are you as reliable, or indeed perhaps less reliable or more reliable than a convict? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. Donald Trump sentenced in New York to an unconditional discharge. Will reflect that as well. And anything else you want to talk about, you think we should be talking about, let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Mia's on the phone today. If you've never done it before, you pick up the phone, you dial the number, you talk to her, you make your point. We'll get as many people on the air as we can between now and 7. I can see people ringing in already. 0344 499 1000. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell on Twitter, or X as no one calls it. You can send me a voice message on the main number. You can send me a WhatsApp text message on the main number. Be sure if you're presenting a programme to switch off your phone so it doesn't ping when you're on air. And of course, you can give me a ring, 0344 499 1000. Lots to discuss between now and 7. Let's get started here on Talk Drive. Right then, let's talk about Rachel Reeves. She's racking up the air miles. She's on her way to China, where she hasn't been, certainly in an official capacity, previously. And actually, there are these annual discussions between Britain and China. She's going to meet the Vice Premier He Lifeng in Beijing to restart annual trade and investment talks. They're meant to happen every year. They haven't happened since 2019. In fact, our entire relationship with China has been all over the place. It's been all over the place in the last 14 years, and one person who's been particularly all over the place has been Liz Truss, who's done a complete 180 on her views on China. Previously, she was all about, yes, let's get the money in, let's make sure that they invest as much as they can in the United Kingdom. Now she hates them and says that they are a threat to our national security. In fact, as Prime Minister, she wanted to designate China as a threat to our national security. She's in the news as well because of Keir Starmer, what he's saying. He says she crashed the economy. She says, say it again, I'll see you, sunshine. Let's talk to James Heal. He's political correspondent of The Spectator. Let's actually talk about Liz Truss first, because there's an entire chapter in your incredibly good book, Out of the Blue, which you co-authored with Harry Cole, who we had on the show yesterday, about Liz Truss's attitude and indeed relations with China, as Trump calls it. So, James, just take us through Liz Truss's different sort of relationship with China, because we've had Cameron and Osborne were very pro-China. Now a lot of people have been parliamentarians, people like Tom Tugendhat, the former security minister and Conservative Party leadership candidate, is actually banned by China, as is Ian Duncan Smith and various other people. Just take us through the sort of broad sweep of the last few years of our relationship with China and where things are now, James.
Sure. I think that Liz Truss really, for most of her career, has reflected the mainstream of conservative thinking, and the sense that she was elected to 2010 as a Cameron-era moderniser, someone who was very much in that kind of social liberal thinking. And then she became schools minister, and she was very excited about the potential of working with China and Shanghai in particular, about looking at collaboration on maths. So maths has always been a big thing for Liz Truss. She loves interviewing aides with mathematics questions, which sort of throws them to see their skills. And so she saw in China the kind of Asian mum phenomena, the sense of that being the growing economy in the East, and that the UK should be more like that. But then we have that's in the sort of high noon of the golden era of UK-China relations. What we then have after that is increasingly an authoritarian position by Xi Jinping. And Liz Truss sort of mirrors the mainstream of Tory opinion in becoming a little bit more sceptical. She hires a few aides, people known to us, Peter, who are much more stiffen up the sinews on this element. And then with the Hong Kong crackdown, she becomes increasingly a China hawk. And I think during the COVID pandemic in particular, there was going to be an inevitable hardening of issues on this. But also you saw this at the Trade Department as well. The government, Boris Johnson's government, had a lot of effort to try and stop this so-called genocide amendment from classifying what was happening to the Uyghur Muslims as a genocide. And Liz Truss was very much relaxed about she actually, fundamentally thought that China was a threat. And then when she then gets her next job, the foreign secretary, the one before she becomes prime minister, she then very much becomes a China hawk. She's constantly thinking that the people in the foreign office are not doing enough to stop this, that they're far too beholden to Beijing, the treasury mindset of wanting more money. And then she does promise in that 2022 summer leadership campaign that she's going to classify China as a threat. And of course, that was one of the many things that were on her desk when she falls for office unrelated to that. And since then, she's only ever harmed.
Oh, we have a slight breaking up of James Healy there, but it does seem that Liz Truss has changed her mind, as has the Conservative Party, as has the Labour Party, on China. Very much like my views on Luke Littler and darts. I used to dislike it, now I like it. Done something of a 180 on that. James, is James back there? Do we have him back? Yeah, James, thank you for that sort of look through. What about Labour? Because they bet the farm, as I said in my introduction, on 2.5% growth. Now they're saying, give us ideas for growth. Well, don't you have any? And similarly, are they now going cap in hand, restarting these investment talks suspended since 2019? I mean, it's a bit embarrassing for Rachel Reeves to have to go to China to say, give us lots of money. Some would say that's actually just a responsible thing that she's doing as Chancellor. But what about Labour's views on China?
Yeah, so the striking thing about Keir Starmer's leadership in so many ways is how it kind of shifts into two phases. The first phase of his leadership, he was sort of quite mainstream soft left. He was very Sino-skeptic. He was wanting to classify what happened to the Uyghur Muslims as a genocide. And then from about 22 onwards, when it looks like Labour are going to win, he becomes much more open to China. And so the past promises of Keir Starmer are coming back to haunt him. He's in office been very pro-China relatively in the concept. So starting these talks on finance for the first time in 5 years, appointing Peter Mandelson, the only Labour peer to vote against the genocide amendment, to Washington as our new ambassador, and of course the Chagos deal, which was going to give the Chagos Islands to a very pro-China regime. So it is a sense of going back on what they said previously on China, their previous stance. And I think it just shows, Peter, that as you said in your introduction, growth is the main priority of this government. And so they are very much following the Treasury thinking that all you have to do is go to China, cap in hand, if you will, and you'll get lots of lovely money to shine on all of us.
So essentially, they've gone back on their word. It's very strange to think that a Labour government would do that. I'm sure the WASPy women, the people who've received and now don't receive winter fuel allowance and so on would be shocked. I tell you, that Labour would say one thing and do another. I mean, is this simply because they've run out of road? The markets are in turmoil here. The pound is in free fall. There's so much pressure on the bond markets, which Darren Jones, who's the sort of number two to Rachel Reeves, the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, is saying the bond markets are acting as they should. Well, are they? And similarly, we're in serious trouble here, and Rachel Reeves, in fact, the fact that she's going has been criticised by her opposite number, Mel Stride.
Yeah, I mean, it casts back memories for those who can remember that of 1976, when, of course, Dennis Healey was about to go to Washington, had a gin and tonic in his hand, and had to fly back and sort of drive back to Labour Party conference to plead to pass his pay deal with the party movement there. And so people are saying all about that. Look, I think this trip has been long planned. It's been planned for about 3 or 4 months or so. So it wasn't necessarily sort of rushing out there at this moment. But as you say, Peter, the economic situation continues to get worse and worse. Traders are now pricing only 1 interest rate cut rather than 4. Price of oil's risen to its highest level since October. So it's a really bad economic situation. The point that China hawks are making to me and people within government is, look at what Germany's had. Germany has been much more pro-China for the past 10 years. Where is all this great Chinese gold? They haven't benefited hugely from it. And actually, just this week, the German federal prosecutor announced charges against 3 men on potentially spying for China or Chinese-related activities. And so I think that it's a real nervousness, I think, in certain elements of government about whether the Chancellor is betting too much on this. There won't be that much money. And actually, is it worth the security concerns as well?
Another thought on, just back to Liz Truss, she is threatening legal action against Keir Starmer. He said he's going to keep saying she crashed the economy, probably because that's, factually accurate. What do you make of that story?
I think Liz Truss, she is someone who's used the phrase crash the economy herself back when it referred to the pre-2010 Labour government. She's obviously someone who enjoys free speech very much. I'm very surprised that she'd make this action, and particularly...
It's a bit unbecoming to be threatening people with legal action for what is essentially an opinion.
Yes, I agree. And I think that it is, never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake. Labour obviously in turmoil over the markets, and so it just gives Labour a good way to get out of jail by constantly saying, Liz Truss, Liz Truss.
It's brought the focus back on her, hasn't it? Tell us a bit about Tulip Siddiq. She's a Labour minister who is controversial at the moment. Just in a nutshell, I mean, it's a complicated and brutally speaking, not that interesting story, but she could well be on her way out. Just tell us why.
Yeah, well, she's the minister with responsibility for corruption in this government, and the allegation is whether she was, properly open and honest about a couple of properties that were she had, which have some connections to the former regime in Bangladesh. Her aunt was the ex-prime minister of Bangladesh from 2009 to 2024 when she had to flee. And so the question is whether about proper declarations, really, Peter. And now it's currently being investigated by the Prime Minister's advisor on this, Laurie Magnus. But it all comes down to, frankly, whether she's been truthful or not with the government and also with the press, because the Mail on Sunday say that they raised issues around this story 2 years ago, and she wasn't fully forthcoming about that. So questions about integrity and honesty in politics, something Labour have talked a very good game on.
Certainly have. And let's talk about briefly about Kemi Badenoch as well. She says Britain is back under union control. She also says that it's Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party and Keir Starmer is just fronting it. I mean, that's a tiny bit on the hyperbolic side.
I think that in many areas, yes. Clearly, Keir Starmer has made great capital of not being Jeremy Corbyn. On education, though, I do think, I talk to Tories and say, look, they haven't got much to show for the last 14 years, but school standards is something that I think everyone, other than the Labour Party, would think has done really well. So they're a bit baffled as to why, of all the things that were junked from the Corbyn regime, the education policy seems to have just walked zombie on, and actually changing some of the coalition reforms is going to be a mainstay of education policy, which seems baffling given how well schools have gone over the last 10 years, only way up.
James, thank you very much indeed. That is James Heal. He is political correspondent of The Spectator. Appreciate your contribution to the show. And thank you to Nigel in London, who's given me a ring about entrepreneurship. Nigel has given me a ring at 0344 499 1000. You can do exactly the same thing. Nigel, what point would you like to make? You're very welcome to the programme. First caller on Talk Drive this Friday.
Oh, great. Good afternoon, Peter. Thank you for having my call. I wanted to say that whether it's a Labour government or, in fact, a previous Tory government, this country suffers from one thing. We do not encourage business growth or entrepreneurship. A classic example, of course, was a recent Labour business summit where they refused to invite Elon Musk. Now, Elon Musk, one could argue, forget his political interest, is the most successful business person in the world. Now,
he's quite literally the most successful living entrepreneur.
Absolutely. And the five most successful ones, four are American and one is French. So why is it we discourage business in this country? We're a country which encourages taxation and nothing else. We don't encourage growth.
Well, Nigel, you're absolutely right. And we're in a situation, as you correctly say, not just what you've just mentioned, but lumping on national insurance and basically saying there is a problem with taxation in this country. We don't have enough of it to run the public services that we need. Now, you can have an argument about whether taxes should be high or low, but Labour have said they should be at a certain level. They are the government. I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's what they've said. They then say, right, well, we're going to lump on national insurance employers' contributions. I mean, if you're a small business, 99% of businesses in this country have 7 or fewer people working for them. And if you say to those people who are the plumbers, the plasterers, the hairdressers, the labourers, the backbone of this country, if you say to those people, when you set up a business, we're going to make it about $2,000 more expensive for you as an employer to employ people, people are going to say, stuff this for a game of soldiers, I'm off to work in the civil service.
Well, exactly. And what would Rachel Reeves do if the majority of these small to medium-sized, even larger businesses decided to make everybody redundant, but then employ them on a freelance consultancy basis where they don't have to pay employers' national insurance contributions? Yep. And that would completely and utterly snooker Rachel Reeves. And this is happening more and more today. And I'm sure you know that lots of companies today are now making people redundant and ask them to reapply for their jobs.
Yep. Yeah, that is happening, or doing a bit of jiggery-pokery on the old tax side, as you say. It is. Your points are all very, very well made. Do you remember what George W. Bush said about the French, Nigel? Do you remember that one?
No, I don't remember it, to be honest with you.
He says the problem with the French is that they have no word for entrepreneur. Nigel, thanks for your call. Really appreciate it. That's Nigel in London there. You can join him on the air, 0344 499 1000. George W. Bush, of course, was at Jimmy Carter's funeral yesterday. The former Democratic President Jimmy Carter died at the age of 100 and was the ceremony at the National Cathedral in Washington yesterday. We'll talk not about that necessarily, but certainly about Britain being back under union control. Is that a reasonable thing? Do you think the unions are in charge after the huge pay increases that they negotiated? I don't know about you, but I want ASLEF involved in my next contract negotiation. Getting a 22% rise for junior doctor. Well, sorry, the junior doctors were 22%. The train drivers, the ASLEF train drivers, got 15%. Many people would argue that's fair enough, and they should get that. I'm not so sure. We'll talk to David Nellis, who's a leader of the trade unionist and the Socialist Coalition. He's also a former Labour MP who was actually expelled back in the 1990s. Yep. So we'll talk to him in just a second. Should be fiery. Stay with us here on Talk.
By tweets. Unbelievable, unbelievable. That.
Changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. What a beautiful name. The Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. China. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, Canada and the United States, that would really be something. All hell will break out in the Middle East, and it will not be good for Hamas, and it will not be good, frankly, for anyone.
The Labour government's counter-extremism unit has been assessing the...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to John, who's been in touch on messages and says, hello, Peter. Technically, Liz Truss didn't crash the economy. It was our Chancellor at the time, Kwasi Kwarteng. Kwasi Kwarteng, the worst Chancellor in the history of this country. That is a fact. If you disagree with me, tell me, but I think you're wrong. It was our Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng. Otherwise, they would be blaming Keir Starmer for Rachel from accounts for crashing the economy. Maybe you think Rachel Reeves is a worse Chancellor than Kwasi Kwarteng, although I'm happy to have that argument with you. Leslie says, hi, Peter. Why wouldn't one Communist Party cozy up and do deals with another Communist Party, says Leslie, equating the People's Republic of China with, of course, the Labour Party. I don't think Labour are a Communist Party at all. Some people think they are, but I don't think they're Jeremy Corbyn Party, but we'll have that discussion with David Nellis in a minute. Debbie has been in touch and says, is Rachel Thieves going to tell China we won't be giving them foreign aid? Hopefully. Ian says, we don't want Chinese money, full stop. Graham says the only growth that Rachel Reeves is getting is the number of air miles in her account. That's Graham and Bushy who says that. Jane's been in touch and says perhaps the Chancellor could look at all the coal-fired power stations and tell Ed Miliband net zero isn't going to work, reflecting what is happening in China. Of course, we'll talk about Ed Miliband's wind problem later on. He also has a problem with gas. We will be discussing that. Sorry, I literally just have the mind of an 8-year-old today. We'll talk to David Nellis in a second, but first of all, I want to talk to Peter in London about grooming gangs, rape gangs, paedophile gangs, whatever you want to call them. We've been discussing this for some time, over a week now. I'm happy to discuss it as long as people want to discuss it. We are talking a little bit later on this programme, actually, about a new survey that shows that people want a grooming gang inquiry. Most Britons want the government, the Telegraph reports, to launch a new inquiry into the scandal. More than 3/4 back demands for a national investigation. That is a YouGov survey. Only 13% of adults agree with the government that no further inquiry is needed, including just 1 in 5 voters. Peter, do you know what? We've got David here, and I'm going to talk to David now, but I will come back to you in just a few minutes, Peter, if that's all right with you. So just hold your horses there, Peter in London. I promise I'll come back to you in a few minutes' time. But first of all, I want to talk to David Nellis, who has joined us now. He is going to talk to us about what Kemi Badenoch is saying. I'm not sure what I think about this. I'll be fascinated to hear what David, who's the leader of the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition, thinks about this, because Kemi Badenoch has told the Telegraph that she is visiting an academy school in London. She said that Keir Starmer has been bowing to union demands. She says she's worried that voters thought the government was moderate like New Labour when, as she put it, what we have is Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party fronted by Keir Starmer. David, it's great to have you in the programme. I think we will both probably disagree with that statement, perhaps from different perspectives, but I wonder what, I don't want to put words in your mouth, what do you think of what Kemi Badenoch has said?
Well, good afternoon, Peter. Look, Kemi Badenoch's got a difficult job. The Tories had their worst general election result for nearly 200 years last year, and she lost half the Rishi Sunak lost half the votes of the Tory party to Reform UK. And Kemi Badenoch is trying to reunite the right. And, you know, in order to get some visibility, she comes out with these backers' statements. I mean, it really is. I only wish the unions were having more influence in running the country. And the idea that Keir Starmer is fronting a Jeremy Corbyn-style Labour Party when Jeremy's been expelled from the Labour Party and almost every single progressive policy he had in 2017 and 2019 have been ditched by Keir Starmer is just frankly absurd.
Can I ask you a question? And I don't mean this to come across as flip or arrogant. I mean, do you think Keir Starmer is just too right-wing?
Oh, yes, absolutely. You know, Labour now is vying for both financial support and political support of the establishment to be a stable party for the establishment's policies, for capitalism, for the interests of big businesses and so on. It isn't the Labour Party I joined in the 1970s, or the one that Jeremy led for that brief period between 2015 and 2019. It's radically trying to change the way in which the economy is run. It's reinforcing the way. So yes, he's too right-wing.
Was it, sorry, I'm just not aware of the history and I probably should have been, but presumably if you're expelled in 1992, that was to do with Neil Kinnock and the militant tendency?
Well, actually, I was, yes, formally expelled in January 1992 because Mrs. Thatcher brought in a thing called the poll tax that was putting hundreds of people in prison. And I said I would go to prison before any pensioner in Coventry did. And that was deemed to be bringing the Labour Party into disrepute. So I was expelled from the Labour Party following the one MP who did go to prison for not paying his poll tax, my mate Terry Fields from Liverpool. As I say, for bringing the Labour Party into disrepute. You're right, that was under Neil Kinnock. But the Labour Party radically moved rightwards under Tony Blair, and Keir Starmer is resurrecting both a lot of the individuals that are involved in that movement to the right under Tony Blair and a lot of the approach and policies.
You may find it interesting, and this is a bit research, but you may find it interesting that in my interview for university I was asked in the early 1990s, did the Labour Party need Brian Gould or Philip Gould? I just thought that might might raise a smile. Interestingly, we have Tad, who has messaged us on text and says, ask David Nellis about what he used to do with his wages. He used to live off what he would earn for the basic living and give the rest to charity. Is that something you did, David?
It is. For the 9 years I was in Parliament, we fixed my family's wage, and my wife, until a few months before I left Parliament, wasn't working, looking after our 3 children. On the average wage in the 10 largest factories in Coventry that a skilled worker got. I hesitate to use the phrase, but we used to base it on the wages of a toolmaker.
Right.
Keir Starmer used to invoke in a lot of...
yes, indeed. Goodness me.
The reason was a fundamental one. I think that anybody gets to the top of politics or trade unions should share the same problems as the people they represent, not be on 3 or 4 times the wages, 2 or 3 times the holidays and so on, and be insulated from those problems.
But how do you get the right people into politics then? Because, you know, you had a very pure motivation for that. I probably wouldn't do that, and I probably wouldn't agree with you on that. But nonetheless, I admire your principles in that regard and walking the walk as well as talking the talk. But often now, when you look at many people who are in Parliament, they're often saying the wages actually aren't high enough and you're not getting high enough calibre people. I mean, there aren't many people these days who see Parliament as a moral mission.
Well, they should do. And they should do it on councils, and they should do it in unions, because I think that sphere of public life, the best people are the ones who want to change it for everybody, not use it as a ladder to get a personal career. And the closer you get to the top of politics, the more you have to serve the existing way in which things are organised, because that's what gives you a good living, not to challenge it and to change it. So the best people for me, the people going to politics to change it for the better for the majority, and that's got nothing to do with the wages you paid.
David, I could talk to you all day. I just want to ask you about this union issue just before you go, which I probably should have asked you at the start of this interview, and then we went in a different direction. But, you know, if you look at what the unions have done under Labour, 22% for junior doctors, 15% for ASLEF train drivers. I always got told off if you just say train drivers. This is ASLEF train drivers. I mean, the unions have done a very good job for their members in getting those wage increases. But surely that shows at least some element of influence, if not control. And Kemi Badenoch, some would argue, has a point in this.
Well, Labour's response was, in order to quickly end those particular strikes in public transport and public health, that they made the offers that they made. When it comes to the rest of the public services, the most recent statements are something like 2.8% for education and other similar services for the next coming year. In education at the moment, and it was a schools bill that Kemi Badenoch was making this statement on the back of, 35% of all newly qualified teachers leave the profession within the first 5 years. We've got a crisis of retention in the education service. We've got 250,000 less workers in the NHS and social care that we should have. And in both those cases, and wider in the public sector, pay, job security, work-life balance, stress, those things aren't being addressed, unfortunately, by the current government. So the unions are right to push back.
We've got a question from Leslie. He says, please ask David where the unions were when Blair opened our borders and brought in decimating our own skilled workforce.
Well, many of them were arguing that factories shouldn't have been exported to other parts of the world looking for cheaper labour, and if there were to be more people coming into the country, then the country had to be organised with enough doctors, enough hospitals, enough dentists, enough houses, all the things that working people need. Otherwise, it is very easy, isn't it, for those on the right of politics to blame the most recent arrivals on a small boat for causing the problems, when the real cause of those problems is the division of money in society, too much of that money being controlled by the rich, and when the rich get hold of it, they export their money to tax havens. Borders don't apply to the rich when it comes to shifting our money overseas.
I would imagine, David, and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would imagine you would fundamentally disagree with many of the things that Nigel Farage says. But I wonder in terms of his economic policies, which, given what you've just said, is probably not a million miles away from where Nigel Farage is economically. I wonder what you make of the economic outlook of Reform UK.
Well, you're right. I do agree with fundamentally the things that Nigel Farage says, but the reason that sometimes those on the right will put forward things like addressing the situation in the health service or more social housing and so on, is that they have to appeal to working people if they want to get votes and they want to get elected. And it's no good coming out with the reality of what their policies are, which is to keep the way in which the economy is presently organised in its current state, which means millions of ordinary people have to scrap and scrap. You know, there was 1.6 million families who had to take out loans to get through Christmas. This is the sixth richest country on the planet, and we've got millions of people who haven't got enough. I don't think Nigel Farage is really looking after ordinary working people, but I accept the point that on some economic issues, to appeal for workers' votes, he does put forward things that sound to the left of Labour.
Very, very interesting to talk to you, David. No doubt we'll talk again. I certainly hope you'll come on the programme again. That's David Nellis there. He's the leader of the Trade Union and Socialist Coalition. He's a former Labour MP, was a Labour MP from 83 to 92 and then was expelled. I could talk to him all day. I mean, I disagree with him on most things, but really, really interesting person. Jane says, unfortunately for Kemi, no one is going to listen to her about anything. The Tories don't realise how the trust has gone and will never return. Well, what do you think about that? 0344 499 1000. As promised, we will talk to Peter in London, but first we're going to talk to Danny Shaw, the Home Affairs commentator and former advisor to Yvette Cooper. This is about the fact that a majority of British people back a new inquiry into the grooming gangs, the paedophile gangs, the rape gangs, whatever you want to call them. Also, MPs must discuss rape gangs' ethnicity. That's according to an aide to Anne Cryer, who was the Labour MP who was at the forefront of this some years ago. Stay with us here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, some breaking news now on Talk, and that is that the head of the Metropolitan Police's Black Police Association, who swapped thousands of racist and sexist WhatsApp messages, has been sacked for gross misconduct. This is Inspector Charles Ekioya, who is 58. He shared more than 7,000 messages with a former PC called Carlo Francisco between 2017 and 2020. They included jokes about Katie Price's disabled son Harvey, disabled people in general, and Muslims. He was the full-time chairman of the Metropolitan Black Police Association. He was dismissed without notice at the end of a misconduct hearing in London today. The panel saying it was an appropriate and proportionate sanction. He claims that he's the victim of a racist conspiracy, and the allegations were found proven by a police disciplinary committee. Yeah, I mean, making jokes about Katie Price's disabled son Harvey, don't do that. Don't ever do that. That's despicable. Let's talk to Danny Shaw. He is a Home Affairs commentator, former advisor to the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. Danny, justice has been served by the sound of it.
Well, the evidence seems pretty damning in this particular case, Peter. And I noted that he had been found guilty by the misconduct panel and really found guilty of gross misconduct. I mean, the sanction has to be a sacking in that kind of case, really. I don't see that there's really any other option for the panel, particularly given the crackdown that Sir Mark Rowley, the Met Commissioner, has launched about standards in the Metropolitan Police. You know, it may be that he will appeal against this dismissal. That's quite common for people to go down that route. They do have a right to appeal, so it's not the end of the story. And we have seen in the past that police officers who've been dismissed or given sanctions have won their appeals. So I wouldn't say it's the end of the story, but on the face of it, the evidence looks pretty damning. The WhatsApp messages are all there that he was exchanging over a long period of time. According to the Met's lawyer, racist, homophobic and videos of an extreme sexual nature were being exchanged with another officer who I believe has left the Metropolitan.
Yeah, he's left the force. There were jokes as well about having sex with a girl with Down syndrome. I mean, if this is true, and that's what the Metropolitan Police said is, this is just a pretty despicable human being. He says there's a racist conspiracy. Will, of course, continue. I mean, I've some of the detail here of what was in some of the messages. It's 20 to 5 in the afternoon. I'm not going to read some of this stuff out. It just sounds absolutely horrendous. Danny, thanks for your analysis of that, especially as it's a breaking news story. Speaking of news stories that are big, that haven't gone away and probably won't go away, nor should they, the rape gang scandal continues, and there is a big survey out saying that a majority of British people back a new inquiry. This is a poll from YouGov saying that more than 3/4 of people say that an investigation should happen. Only 13% of adults agree with the government that no further inquiry is needed, including just 1 in 5 Labour voters. Do you think, I want to ask you sort of two separate questions. One I'll ask you secondarily, which is what would you advise Yvette Cooper to do? Let's not get into that just for a second. What do you think will happen? Is it inevitable that a national inquiry or some form of further inquiry, maybe locally, will happen in terms of where this issue is, both morally, politically, in terms of what the public are saying? What do you think?
I don't think there will be a national inquiry. I think it's possible that the government will institute some kind of give some sort of support to more local inquiries, which I think they've already mentioned. I think Yvette Cooper in her statement on Monday said that there was someone, a key figure, who would help local councils and authorities if they want to do inquiries. I'm also quite struck by the comments of Harriet Harman, the former Labour MP. I think she now sits in the House of Lords.
She does, yeah.
Who's sort of charted a more constructive way forward, which is really about giving people in councils, social services and police and others the support to tackle these issues, so that they feel that that they're not bound by concerns about political correctness, but they confront these issues head on. They do it in the right way, and they're not sort of frightened off it because they're being accused of racism.
Yeah.
And she suggested a sort of framework, support, and guidance around, what is the best way to approach these issues? Because I think, honestly, Peter, that's at the root of the problem. I honestly don't think we need another inquiry right now. I just don't think that's the priority. I know what the opinion poll says, but opinion polls can say a lot of things. We've had 7 years, £200 million, an inquiry, 61 reports and publications, 2 million pages of evidence. We've had other local inquiries. We've had inquiries Sajid Javid, former Home Secretary, did. We know what the issues are. OK, there's always more stuff that can come up. The priority's got to be protecting young people, implementing the recommendations, none of them implemented so far.
Yeah.
Giving support to the police to go after the gangs and the perpetrators.
On that note,
that's priority, surely.
On that note, Danny, look, I know and you know the Home Office is a tricky place. It is a very complex place, and there are lots of ways in which implementing those 20 different recommendations, or the 18 that the Conservatives accepted, I think it is pretty inexcusable that the Conservatives were in power for 18 months after the Professor Alexis J report. They said they accepted 18 of the 20 recommendations, and what was done? Nothing in 18 months. However, Labour have been in power for 6 months. They knew Jess Phillips was going to come in. The Home Office knew Jess Phillips was going to come in as a minister, or it was highly likely that that was going to happen. It was highly likely, nearly inevitable, that Labour were going to win the election in 2024. So my point to the Home Office would be, and I wonder what you think about this, is surely you're ready to go on day one. If you have Jess Phillips as your minister, surely you're going to say, right, OK, this is going to take primary legislation. It's going to be really complex. It's going to be really difficult to get through Parliament. But surely when the minister comes in, you say, right, Minister Phillips, what's your number one priority? Well, as you are aware, I've been talking about this for years and years and years. What I would like to do is implement the Professor Alexis J report. Let's do that. I mean, surely that just happens quickly. And I think the public and many of our viewers and listeners are absolutely baffled, both by the failure of the Conservatives over 18 months to do really anything about what Professor Alexis J has done. I've asked Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, about that. He was a Home Office minister in government. But I just can't get to the bottom of the Labour aspect of this. What do you think, Danny?
I think you've got a really good point. I looked through the Labour manifesto, and obviously I had some role in that, and I don't think there's a mention of it. There's no mention in the manifesto itself of implementing the recommendations or the key recommendation about mandatory reporting. Now, look, it had been part of Labour Party policy. They said they were going to do it. And I think perhaps what has happened is they almost kind of took it for granted that that was what they were going to do. But didn't make it a central plank of the manifesto, even mention it in the manifesto. And I think you're right. 6 months have elapsed, and it's taken this, political storm with, voices off and a whole row about it to bring to bring the Home Secretary, my old boss, to the House of Commons to make.
What would you advise her to do? I think I don't expect you to respond to this, Danny, and I don't want to put you on the spot on this, but I think Labour dropped the ball not bringing you into the Home Office. I think that was a mistake. What would you advise Yvette Cooper to do at this moment?
Well, I think the statement that she made last week, on Monday, was the right thing to do, saying that they were going to implement the mandatory reporting. Grooming would be an aggravating factor in sentencing, and a new performance framework for recording ethnicity of perpetrators, because there is some data out there, and it does show that Pakistanis are overly represented in terms of perpetrators in grooming, but the data's not great, and it needs to be collected in a better way. So I think that's a good first step. But I would just say you've got to make real progress on this really quickly in the next couple of weeks and ensure there's some kind of action plan. And I would also think very seriously about taking Harriet Harman up on her suggestion of ensuring that people give them the tools so they have the confidence to tackle these issues head on. But please don't waste more money on legal fees on another national inquiry. Okay. It's not what is needed right now.
Danny, thank you. Home Affairs commentator and a former advisor to Yvette Cooper, Danny Shaw, thank you for your thoughts on that. Do you agree, disagree with them? Let's find out with Peter in London, who's been waiting very patiently for the last 15 minutes. Peter, what do you think of what Danny said? What do you think needs to happen?
Hello, Peter. Well, it might sound a bit naive, but I think we need a people's inquiry. And it's a shame that Mike Mansfield is retired, because he would be brilliant for it, I think.
What would a people's inquiry be? How would that work, Peter?
Well, it'll be the obviously the survivors, victims' families, they would be up front, and they would be the main focus. Obviously, I don't trust the police. Those who basically deny the facts. I would have Donna Jones representing the police, maybe, and then I would have whistleblowers, Maggie Oliver, Jane Senior.
There are a lot of very compelling stories, and the problem is that a lot of people think that, look, there have been inquiries previously and they haven't really got anywhere. And your thought on this, your kind of design for an inquiry, for many people, I'm sure that will resonate with them, Peter.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I think so.
Well, Peter, thank you for your thoughts. Appreciate that. That's Peter in London there. Thank you to Amanda in London, who says, good afternoon, Peter. Good afternoon, Amanda. Starmer and his cohort should hang their heads in shame. They've made us a laughing stock of this world. The rape gang scandal should bring this vile government down, says Amanda. Jane says, perhaps none of the front benchers should claim expenses for anything by having a government rule or a shadowing one. I'm sure they could afford their heating and council tax, says Jane. Tad says, I worked at a number of places in Coventry 50-odd years ago, and I can't quite recall which place I first met Dave Nellis, who was the guy we spoke to just before we spoke to Danny Shaw there. But he was always amiable, quite unlike the present crop of Labour politicians. Regards, Tad. Lots more to discuss, including the farmers protesting, targeting supermarket supply chains. We'll get the latest on that, talking to the Countryside Alliance in just a moment. Stay with us.
I think also that it's tempting to sit here and, you know, look at the likes of Rachel Reeves and acknowledge, like, yeah, it's pretty evident that this woman is not really well suited to this job. You know, Rachel from accounts and all the rest of it. Yeah. But I think actually, if we look into the economic philosophy that seems to underpin this Labour government, I think there's a number of things that we need to say, because, you know, within the budget there was an order for public bodies to reduce their spending, you know, efficiency cuts effectively.
Yep.
But there's never any conversation of, you know, sort of more broad cuts on things that are, you know, non-necessary spending.
The Labour government's counter-extremism unit has been assessing the risk posed to Britain by Elon Musk's tweets. What do you reckon of that?
This is so fun. I mean, it's almost funny, isn't it?
He's laughing.
I love that.
The risk posed to Britain by tweets. Unbelievable, unbelievable. That.
Across the UK, on DAB+, On your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Chris is in Brighton and has a very good point where he says, I wonder if this now former head of the Black Police Officers Association, we reported that story a little bit earlier on, just the breaking news this afternoon, that that dude who was head of the Metropolitan Police Black Police Association sending horrendously racist, sexist WhatsApp messages, sacked after gross misconduct. And Chris in Brighton says, I wonder if this person will now be visited by police officers regarding non-crime hate speech. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Well, hopefully he will. He certainly lost his job anyway, and rightly so. Peter, another texter, says the J report, this is the Alexis J report into sexual abuse, the J report barely touched Muslim rape gangs. We need to look at how and why gangs of Muslims did what they did to white and Sikh girls. I totally agree with that. In fact, Rotherham was mentioned, do you know how many times it was mentioned in that 200-page report? Once. And they're saying, well, just implement this report and everything will be fine. Will it? I'm not sure it will. And that's why I think there is actually quite a lot that can be done. Stephen says, just how difficult can it be to deport serious criminals, especially when the vast majority of the population are behind it? William in Horley says, I'm not sure about another national inquiry into rape gangs, but I certainly think there should be an investigation into lack of action by the police. Many horror stories are coming out regarding the lack of support and action by the police, which I think is totally unacceptable and should be investigated and dealt with appropriately. The police need to start doing their job regardless of race. William, cannot disagree with a syllable of that. Thank you for that. Let's talk about another political story. It's a story about food. It's a story about farmers. It's a story about inheritance tax. It is the fact that farmers are going to be blocking roads and targeting supermarket supply chains. Let's talk to Mo Metcalf-Fisher, who's the External Affairs Director of the Countryside Alliance. Mo, this appears to be the sort of next step in all of this. Tell us what's going to happen and what is happening.
Well, it seems that there's a group of farmers who want to, let's just say, turn it up a notch when it comes to protesting. And today that there was hundreds of tractors that went on slow drives. Some attempted to block or make allow presence outside supermarket chain distribution chains in around 40 different areas. I was actually just looking at a report of where those tractors were appearing, and one of them, for example, was High Peak, which is a recently Labour seat. It actually was a Labour gain at the last election from the Conservative Party, as indeed quite a few of these seats where tractors and protests are appearing. Look, I was yesterday, Peter, I was at the Oxford Farming Conference, and it just seemed that Steve Reid and the government just weren't interested really.
That's the Environment Secretary, Labour's Environment Secretary, Steve Reid. I wonder, tell us more about what you made of what he was saying there, because he had previously said this isn't coming and then had to apologise for saying, oh yeah, actually it is.
Yeah, well, he actually apologised for the shock of it. But
he apologised for the shock of it.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. He implied that. Yeah, he implied that he understood why we were so shocked and angry. He didn't offer anything beyond that.
I understand your anger, but I'm not sorry for changing the rules on inheritance tax. Interesting. Yeah. We're paraphrasing there. I'm sure Steve Reid would say something else, and if he wants to talk to us, he's very welcome to do so. I'm on till 7. But Mo, just tell us a little bit about why the farmers are in this situation, just to remind us, because what they're doing now, they're doing these go slows, they're talking about supermarket supply chains. I mean, everything's peaceful so far, and I'm sure it will be from now on. But still, I certainly hope it is, and I know that the Countryside Alliance is a totally peaceful organisation. But there will be people worried about the effects of this, and the effect, especially in terms of supermarket supply chains, on people who've done absolutely nothing wrong, who are just trying to get through the week and feed their families.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, Peter, the Countryside Alliance and the NFU have been very clear that we don't want the public in any way caught up in all this. And in fact, the farmers I was with yesterday were also very clear about that. And I don't think I've actually met a farmer that does want to engage in that more militant French-style action. It's not really the way we do things here.
I remember in Northern Ireland there was a protest about the price of bacon once, and farmers let pigs run riot in a supermarket. That's not a good idea.
It's not a good idea. It's thoroughly un-British. It's not the way we do things.
Not very nice to the pigs either.
Yeah, it's not very nice to the pigs. But Peter, what I would say is on January the 25th, this is what you've got to look out for. It's the more organised, NFU-backed, Countryside Alliance-involved events that are happening in key rural areas that have Labour constituencies, Labour MPs now. Because what's so worrying about that is a lot of these MPs, they're sitting on razor-thin majorities. Okay, and they got in many cases because they had actually worked really well and closely with the National Farmers Union and made it clear to their rural electorate that they would be on their side. And now so many people feel so betrayed. So I'd be looking out for those more constituency-focused, targeted days. You know, next week there are going to be farmers outside supermarkets talking to the public. This will turn into like a constant campaign before the election's even begun. You know, you're going to have farmers who are not used to campaigning or protesting. They're not serial protesters by any means. They don't want to be doing it. They want to be farming and producing food and doing what they love doing best. But until Labour get a grip on this, get us all around the table and work a way out, this is going to be like one long battle and campaign. It's going to be a terrible look for them, and it's going to dog them for the rest of this Parliament. They need to be warned.
Mo, thank you for that. Just before you go, when did you get rid of the beard?
I never had a beard, Peter.
Did you not have a beard?
No, I never had a beard.
Did you have any facial hair?
I think there was a time during COVID that I might have dabbled in that way of life.
Right. Maybe you should just grow the hair out and then you could have a mofro.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give it a go for you next time.
Give the mofro a go. Thank you, Mo. That's Mo Metcalfe-Fisher, who's External Affairs Director of the Countryside Alliance. Thank you to him. Thank you also to Leslie, who says, surely there's enough documentation still available to investigate criminally who turned a blind eye to those young girls and were let down so badly. They deserve answers. Totally agree with you, Leslie, on the gangs. Clarence Buckley says, regarding an inquiry into the rape gangs, I think it should be Maggie Oliver, Peter Blexley and Isabel Oakeshott. 3 people we could trust to root out the rot. And Rennick in Gateshead says, every Labour lefty that comes on the radio or TV quotes the J inquiry, but as Maggie Oliver has said, this barely touched on the grooming gangs. That's why we need a specific inquiry just into those gangs. And I think a lot of people agree with that. Rotherham was only mentioned once. There were a few times when those gangs were mentioned, but it was into the whole thing, the whole quantum of grooming gangs. It wasn't into, and rape gangs, paedophile gangs, let's call them what they are. It wasn't into the whole thing. It wasn't into, it was into the whole thing. It wasn't into the specific issue, which is a huge issue. It's an issue that's still happening today, and we're going to continue talking about it. And if you want to talk about it, you let me know. 0344 499 1000. In a moment, we're going to talk more about China, because Rachel Reeves, as we speak, is racking up the air miles and heading there. Is that going to be the panacea for the economic woes that we're having at the moment? Will that generate growth? We'll also talk about Ed Miliband's gas problem, and the sport is coming up in the next hour as well. So I just have the mind of an 8-year-old. He has a gas problem and a wind problem. We're also going to talk a little bit later on about ex-convicts. Are they as reliable as other staff? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us here on Talk. Plenty still to come between now and 7.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good evening. This is Talk Drive. Hopefully you've been with us for the last hour, but if you haven't, we've had spirited debates about all sorts of things, including whether Keir Starmer is secretly a communist, whether Rachel Reeves is secretly a communist. She's certainly going to meet some over the next few days. She's on her way to China at the moment. We'll talk about that in just a moment with Luke de Pulford, who is creator and executive director of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China and owner of one of the world's longest job titles. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the sport. We'll talk about Ed Miliband and gas storage levels concerningly low after the cold snap. That's according to the owner of British Gas. Let me know your thoughts on gangs as well, rape gangs. We're talking about that. Lots of people want to get in on that. We'll take more calls this hour as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. And also let us know your thoughts about what the prisons minister has been saying. He says ex-convicts are just as reliable as other staff. Really? Anyway, let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. You can text me at 72222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell, or send me a voice note, a WhatsApp text message, or indeed you can give me a ring, 0344 499 1000. Stay with us here on Talk. Plenty more to come between now and 7. Should say that at 7 o'clock, Kevin O'Sullivan takes over. He's here between 7 and 9, and he'll still be on the air for another hour with What Just Happened between 9 and 10. We'll play that to you. TV show, but it's very radio-friendly as well, no matter how you're watching or listening to the programme. Jay in Leicestershire has been in touch on this story. This is the breaking news this afternoon, the last half an hour or so, that the head of the Metropolitan Police's Black Police Association, who swapped thousands of racist and sexist WhatsApp messages, has been sacked on gross misconduct. Jay says, I think there's a point being missed about the Metropolitan Police Inspector sacked for sharing messages on WhatsApp. These were jokes shared privately. They may have been in bad taste, in the same way that some comedians make jokes in poor taste, but they were private messages. Would that happen in the private sector? Would you advocate for a comedian to be no platform for a racist joke that some find funny? Think you're giving him a bad time just because he is police, says Jay in Leicestershire. Jay, really? Really? Okay, this dude is the head, or was the head, of the Metropolitan Police's Black Police Association, right? He's making racist jokes. He's saying there's a racist conspiracy against him because he's black, but he has made racist jokes. He's also made jokes about Katie Price's son, okay? Harvey, you know, the guy, the son of Katie Price who's severely disabled. He's made jokes about having sex with people who have got Down syndrome. I don't want this person anywhere near law enforcement, okay? He can make those jokes in his own time if he wants to. He shouldn't, because they're awful and they're horrendous and they're offensive and they're dreadful and they're just not a nice thing to do. Look, there is humour that pushes the boundaries. I am for free speech in this country, absolutely fine. Were they private? Well, whether they're private or not, they're not private anymore. And what we know is that this person thinks in that way. He thinks those things are funny, and he thinks that's appropriate to share with a colleague. Okay, that's what he's done. I'm not saying I'm Mother Teresa. I'm not saying I've never, told an off-colour joke or laughed at something that someone has said that is something that is not, politically correct or whatever. We all have. We've all done that. But the extent and the aspect and the subject matter of some of this stuff, who then puts himself up and says, I'm the head of the Metropolitan Police, Black Police Association. I'm, a moral arbiter on racism in this country and in the Metropolitan Police. So I think my points are pretty well made there, Jay. You may disagree. Text me in to tell me I'm wrong. By all means, give me a ring and tell me I'm wrong. 0344 499 1000. But call me old-fashioned, but I don't want people who make jokes about disabled people lecturing us on whether we are or are not racist in regard to the police. That's not something I'm happy with. So there we are. Thank you for your message. Nonetheless, Jay, we happily disagree without being disagreeable on this programme. Maybe we'll do it about China, because we're going to talk about Rachel Reeves missing in action as she flies to China while markets are in turmoil. The Conservatives have said she's missing in action. This is a long-planned trip. Maybe she should just go there anyway. Let us know your thoughts on that. Luke de Pulford is with me now. He's creator and executive director of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China. Luke, is Rachel Reeves right to go to China? What message should she give them?
Well, Look, it's actually not totally straightforward. It's not a bad thing to be engaging with China. We need to engage with them because we need to make known our values. We need to make known where we stand and what we're not going to tolerate. And given Beijing's behaviour in the past 5 years, there's a heck of a lot to say about that. But the problem with this visit is that Beijing knows, and everybody in London knows, and a government minister even said 2 days ago that we're going with a begging bowl. The context here is really important. Our economic and financial dialogue with China was paused in 2020 because of the imposition of the national security law in Hong Kong. Things have got worse in Hong Kong, not better. It's not as if that situation has miraculously gone away. It's worse. And what China did to Hong Kong was a direct 2 fingers up to the United Kingdom, tearing up a treaty that we had with them. So by turning up with a begging bowl because we believe ourselves to be in economic danger, we are rewarding impunity and handing them a propaganda victory. That's what my main worry would be about this trip. We're also going to get nothing from it. And the idea that there's going to be a big Chinese-shaped pot of gold at the end of this trip is a nonsense. It didn't happen during the so-called golden era of George Osborne and David Cameron. The money never came. And it isn't going to come now, particularly with the Chinese economy doing so badly. So that's a summary of the concerns.
Do you think China might be a bit confused by our attitude as a country towards them? Because it has shifted many, many times over the past 15 years in terms of whether they think they're a foe, they're a friend, that they're going to be economically brilliant to us, that it's going to be a catastrophe if we involve them economically, whether there should be tariffs, whether there shouldn't. It just seems to me that if I was the Chinese, who have, there are many, many feelings of the Chinese Communist Party in regard to human rights, in regard to how they suppress their people, in regard to free speech. There are loads of ways I don't like them, but they're nothing if not consistent. The same cannot be said for the British sort of parliamentary and political establishment.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. Not only would I think Beijing possibly be confused by the posture of the UK towards them, we're all confused as well. And in fact, government's confused. Between government departments, you have completely different attitudes. You've got the Treasury, who, predicated on this sort of dogma of China or bust, are pushing everybody to do as much business as they can. Department for Trade is doing that. And then you've got the Security Minister and various other departments saying, whoa, hang on, we've got a big problem of infiltration and espionage here that needs to be dealt with. We've got a big problem of foreign direct investments trying to take over our critical national infrastructure. This is an issue. We need to deal with it. So it's completely incoherent. So no wonder Beijing might be confused. I think that's true. I don't think that we've been consistent, and the last government wasn't either. So this isn't necessarily a party political point. What's worrying about this visit is that we are seeing a very naked attempt to return to the golden era, as if the last 5 years of really quite extreme authoritarianism from Beijing never happened, as if Hong Kong never happened.
But I agree with you, but it's always been authoritarian, has it not? I mean, there has never been an age where life in China has been fine for the people who are there. And some people might say, pragmatically, well, look, China's a fact of life. We've got to deal with them. Let's get as much economic investment out of them as we can.
Well, the counter-argument to that would be that actually what happened when China joined the World Trade Organization was that the rest of the world laboured under the misapprehension that they would open up and democratise.
But that was pretty stupid, wasn't it?
Well, it was stupid, but what's happened is the opposite. So since 2019, we've seen a genocide in the northwest of China against Uyghurs and other Turkic minorities. We've seen Hong Kong, don't even mention Tibet. And in addition to that, we now see, and you would have surely not missed this news over Christmas, the massive overseas interference operation that is the United Front Work Department, which has even touched our own royal family, and according to the Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee, has penetrated every area of the United Kingdom economy.
We covered that in some depth, Luke, and it was one of those rare occasions when you had the words Prince Andrew and intelligence in the same sentence.
Well, I don't know, I can't comment on that, but what I would say about it is the China that we see now is more authoritarian than it has been in the last 40 years, and because of the power and size of China now, it's an entirely different beast. It wants to reshape the global order in its own image. That's an explicit aim of the Chinese Communist Party. And rather than rolling out the red carpet, crippling ourselves through dependency upon Chinese manufactured renewables or whatever else, we need to be standing up for our values, reducing dependency and talking to like-minded nations about what we're going to do about this problem, not turning up with a begging bowl thinking that they're going to solve our economic woes, which is what Rachel Reeves is doing.
There will be, undoubtedly, there will be the discussion to some way, even if it's just lip service, on human rights. I mean, in an ideal world, Luke, what would you like Rachel Reeves to go in there and say on human rights to the Chinese Communist Party? Because we have... I remember in Northern Ireland, for example, Michelle O'Neill, the First Minister of Northern Ireland, met a Chinese official, didn't mention human rights as far as we know. And there are lots of Western nations who say, oh, don't upset the apple cart, especially when it comes to economic relations. I mean, my clear view on this is that there is a very strong moral argument on this, that we as Western nations should be, falling over ourselves to be as robust as we can on human rights, because the Chinese need to hear it. What do you think Rachel Reeves should do versus what she will do?
Well, I do think that she will mention various human rights-related concerns simply because there's been so much noise about it in the UK Parliament, and we've also got 7 sanctioned UK politicians and a whole bunch of others externally who are also sanctioned. They're going to be raised, but it'll be this perfunctory thing at the end of a diplomatic meeting. That's what normally happens, unfortunately. So I don't expect her to make it front and centre. What I would say, there's a case of a media magnate called Jimmy Lai, British citizen, who they're trying to blame for everything that happened in Hong Kong in 2019. They're trying to pin that all on him, ludicrously. I'm even named a co-conspirator in that case, even more ludicrously, because I barely know the guy. Anyway, he's a British citizen. He's been in solitary confinement for over 4 years. He can't receive any consular assistance when he's out there. And Reeves has got to mention this. So it's completely intolerable. It makes a mockery of the United Kingdom's commitments to the people of Hong Kong. That case is really emblematic of it, and I think she's got to raise it.
Very interesting to talk to you, Luke. Thank you. That's Luke de Pulford there. He is creator and executive director of the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. Thank you to him. Jill's given me a ring from Cornwall, 0344 499 1000. What do you make of Rachel Reeves heading to China, Jill?
Well, she can stay there as far as I'm concerned. I don't have any faith in her at all. And what she's done to this country since they got in power is enough to break the backs of it. And the daft thing is, she's going across to China, and what she has done will create something like 70,000 jobs in China as a result of what she's done in this country.
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, she says that China can help us, China can get the growth that we need, the 2.5% growth. They can invest in this country and solve all our problems.
Well, I just don't believe it. I'm sorry. I don't have any faith in the Chinese. I don't necessarily believe that they will do anything that will help this country unless it benefits themselves first. And let's face it, in the last few years, there have been so many problems with China, just individual small things like, having spies in the country. We've just... There's been nothing that makes me want to trust them. Yeah. And because she is so incompetent, well, I think she's an incompetent idiot. Because she's incompetent, but she has this power under her belt, I just can't believe that she won't get duped into something that's going to draw us into more problems than we've already got.
We will see what happens, but Jill, thank you for your thoughts. Really appreciate that. That's Jill in Cornwall there. Andy in Thatcham says, Peter, the first thing Rachel from Accounts should do... Listen, I'm not against people calling her Rachel from Accounts, but should we call him Wes the hospital porter? Should we call him Peter Kyle the... I don't know, the intern. Let's spread the wealth if we're slagging them off. Andy in Thatcham says the first thing Rachel from Accounts should be doing is asking China for reparations for COVID. If she's refused, then she should get straight back on the plane, says Andy. George in Croydon says, great show, Peter. Why can't a national phone number be set up so that victims of the rape gangs can call in to report? This way we'll be able to find out how widespread this is, says George in Croydon. George, you would hope that the number for the police would be that number, wouldn't you? Would hope 112, is that it for the non-emergency number, or 999? I mean, you would hope that there would be records that would exist. You would hope this would be a relatively straightforward, not easy, but straightforward exercise to get to the bottom of this. Scott in Ipswich says, hi Cardi P, I've just had a letter from the government asking me to complete a community survey, which if I complete, I get a £10 voucher. Up to 3 people in my home can claim this. They can give us money to fill out a form, but not heat for our elderly. It's a joke, says Scott in Ipswich. I think I've received, in fact, I'm pretty sure I've received those too, from the Office of National Statistics. And if you fill in a form, it takes about 7 or 8 minutes, and you just answer a few questions about things, and it goes into their database. They send it to me, I think, every 3 months or something. You get a £10 voucher, and I've been spending them, where else? Pizza Express. I should say that other pizza restaurants are available. They're just not as good. We're going to talk about Ed Miliband's gas problem next. Stay with us here on Talk.
I think also that it's tempting to sit here and look at the likes of Rachel Reeves and acknowledge, it's pretty evident that this woman is not really well suited to this job. Rachel from accounts and all the rest of it. But I think actually, if we look into the economic philosophy that seems to underpin this Labour government, I think there's a number of things that we need to say because within the budget there was an order for public bodies to reduce their spending, efficiency cuts effectively.
Yep.
But there's never any conversation of sort of more broad cuts on things that are non-necessary spending.
I moved some money from one ISA to another ISA, and I had to go to this place that I'd never heard of before, and it seems perfectly reputable bank. I'm not going to tell you who it is. I got an email from them, right, about a month after I'd opened the ISA, to say, good news, we've planted a tree in your name. I'm like, what? What do you mean you plant a tree in my name? Why?
To do that.
Why? I don't want you to plant a bloody tree in my name. Can I go and see the tree? Where is the tree? They
Can I
wouldn't
name
tell me.
it?
Is it a money tree?
It's not a money tree,
Very good.
unfortunately.
Very good.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Betty, who says the only deal with China involves access to telecoms and energy, so they have control. The USA will cut off all security ties in this case. Is this part of Labour's plan? They've always wanted the US out of the UK and the relationship broken, says Betty. I think it's going to be fascinating. Maybe we should have got into that with Luke, actually. I think it'll be fascinating when Donald Trump takes over. I really do, because the relationship between the United States and China and the UK is going to be very, very different. Right then, let's talk about Ed Miliband's gas problem. Ben Pyle is with us. He is co-founder of the Climate Debate UK. There are various issues with Ed Miliband, mainly because the gas storage levels are concerningly low, we're told, with less than a week of demand available. The operator of the country's largest gas storage site has warned this is because, unsurprisingly, people want to use gas because there have been low temperatures, high demand for gas-fired power, and, of course, the march towards net zero. Ben, what's your reaction to this? What do you think? I mean, my initial thoughts, and you're the expert, but my initial thoughts are, if you start telling people to use less gas and renewables are there, then the renewables aren't that reliable, well, then you're going to have low levels of gas storage. I mean, it seems to be pretty straightforward. Am I right or misguided?
You're probably right. I mean, at this time of year, typically our gas storage reserves are full, but we're apparently, according to an analysis, about 60% where we normally are, and that sort of runs out by the end of the spring. But that's when we need much less heating. So over the next few months, through the summer, into the autumn, those stores are replenished. And there's been no statutory responsibility on Centrica, which is the company that operates these storage facilities. There's been they've got no sort of statutory responsibility to make sure they're at a certain level, and the government certainly doesn't seem to be that interested in taking control of it either. But what we're facing now is essentially years of indifference to this form of energy, which we really do rely on, having now destroyed all of our coal-burning power stations. So now, when there's no wind and when there's no solar, when the sun's not shining, there's no electricity being produced, or there's only a trickle from various other renewable sources or other sources. So this is what we're going to face more and more of. The more the likes of Ed Miliband sort of celebrate the fact. I mean, earlier on in the week, he was tweeting how great it was that for the first time in our history, more electricity was produced from wind turbines than from gas-fired power stations. Now, that's great if your only criteria for measuring the performance of the government and British businesses is just how much energy is produced by the wind versus gas. But all of us need warm homes. All of us need businesses, and all of us need to get that energy for an affordable price. When that doesn't happen, the businesses fold and people go cold, and worse, people become ill or even die. You look at someone like Ed Miliband's ambition, and he's practically fizzing with energy at these kind of developments. He can hardly contain himself about the success of this policy agenda. But this week we've seen temperatures of minus 16 degrees in parts of England. We've seen in the autumn and in the winter, the Ofcom's price cap go up. And that price cap is going to go up again in April, despite the Ed Miliband and the government coming to power on the promise of lower bills. That's manifestly a lie. That's manifestly something that the government told the public in order to get votes, and in order to sort of make them feel safer about the chaos, frankly, that the last government caused with respect to energy policy. And now we're running out of gas. Because no government has taken gas production seriously. They've all been sort of blinded. Let me get
your reaction to what the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero has said in response to this storage alert.
Probably guess.
Yeah, and this storage alert from Centrica. Centrica is the company that owns British Gas, and it says it has a rare. This is a rare notice to power firms given by the UK's energy grid operator. And what the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, this is Ed Miliband's department, says, we have no concerns and are confident we will have sufficient gas supply and electricity capacity to meet demand this winter due to our diverse and resilient energy system. Our mission to make Britain a clean energy superpower will maintain the UK's energy security in the long term, investing in clean homegrown power and protecting bill payers. What do you make of that, Ben?
Yeah, well, I've read about 12 stories today from the press that were sort of about things such as this. The other one being the rising the energy. The other margin notice that was issued by the National Energy Systems Operator on, I think, Tuesday, about the shortfall of electricity. Every answer from the government, from the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, says how great how great it's going to be when Britain is a clean energy superpower, right? That's all they've got to say about these things. So it's true, right? There are ways that these risks of blackouts and supply shortages can be mitigated. That's often by turning off large consumers of electricity, and gas. So if you run a factory, you get paid to turn off your works, right? And so they said on the same on Tuesday that Wednesday they would not be rolling blackouts. But what happened was the price of electricity per megawatt hour rose to £5,000. So it's £5,000 per megawatt hour. At the end of November, by contrast, it was about £85 per megawatt hour. Now that only happens for a few hours, but this adds more and more to the costs of energy. So the grid becomes less stable, and in order to manage the shortcomings, it costs more and more to stabilize it. And what we should have done is 10 or 20 years ago taken this problem much more seriously. If we were going to go down the climate route, if we were going to go down the net zero route and planned properly, we should have had nuclear power stations if we were going to have zero carbon, or we should have invested more in gas production. We should have exploited more North Sea oil and gas, and we should have developed shale gas, fracking in the UK. But that's been politically, that was a political hot potato. Nobody wanted to go there, and even Conservative governments were very quick to ban it. I think the Boris Johnson government said very early on, we're going to ban this. Liz Truss very briefly turned that around. In her short time as PM, there was a bill to reverse the ban, and then as soon as Rishi Sunak came in, he rebanned it. Right. So there's been no real recognition about what kind of danger there is with short energy shortages. There's lots of discussion, lots of lies actually from the Green movement about how dangerous gas is, how dangerous climate change is, but no one's talking about what it's going to look like when energy gets more expensive and more scarce.
Okay, Ben, thank you very much. That's Ben Pyle there, who's the co-founder of Climate Debate UK, and we are certainly having that debate. Let us know your thoughts on this. 0344 499 1000. Ian has been in touch actually about this story. Broke about an hour ago about Inspector Charles Ekeoya, who is 58 and was the head of the Metropolitan Police's Black Police Association, who swapped thousands of racist and sexist WhatsApp messages. He has been sacked from that role. Ian says, how many police officers did this Charles Ekeoya investigate and take to trial for racist or diversity, equity and inclusion concerns? How can anything he has done in his role ever be considered impartial and true when he is clearly a racist himself? Ian, I'm going to keep us both out of court by saying that I'm sure Charles Ekeoya would deny being a racist, but what is the evidence here is that he sent many, thousands in fact, of racist and sexist WhatsApp messages. Let me know your thoughts on this. 0344 499 1000. We'll talk about the rape gangs inquiry as well, what should be done on that, and about former prisoners. How trustworthy are they? Should they be given a second chance, or should we shun them in favour of people who can't get a job? Stay with us here on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So when I make a mistake, I'm very happy to correct it. Accuracy is incredibly important on this programme. It's very important in the media in general. And recently you told us through an Ofcom survey, believe it or not, that we were one of the most trusted news brands. In fact, we were the most trusted news brand in the UK from people who watch and listen to us. So when I make a mistake, I want to get it right. I want to correct it. I want to say, yes, I was wrong. Let's get it right. Earlier on, I said that 112 was the non-emergency police number. That's incorrect. It's actually 101. So 101 is the non-emergency number for police if you want to contact the police, and you should be put in touch with your local police when that happens, 101. And actually 112, which was the number I gave, is actually the same as 999. So as well as 999, you can also dial 112. Thank you to our producer, Ryan, for checking that out. Very happy to correct any errors I make. And if I make them, you tell me. And if an apology is needed, I will tell you, because I want to be as honest and straightforward with you as I can be. I don't want to cover anything up. I don't want to be embarrassed by anything that I get wrong. I want to tell you, whether it's big, small, whatever. I get it wrong, you tell me. You give us a ring, 0344 499 1000. Lots of people in touch, including this person who says, genuine question, if we haven't enough energy to keep the lights on now, where is it coming from for the 1.5 million new homes? Well, may you ask. What about all the new electric cars they want us to buy as well? These questions have not been answered. Elizabeth says this government is getting more incompetent by the day. And Ian says if Ed Mill, a Marxist like it, is fizzing with energy, let's plug him into the national grid. It's the only way he'll ever... Sorry. It's brilliant. Sorry, this is a great message. Ian says, I'll try and get through this without laughing. If Ed Miller Marxist is fizzing with energy, let's plug him into the national grid. It's the only way he will ever be of use to this country. Ian, that is a classic. That is the message of the day. That is very funny and well put together, well constructed. So thank you for that, Ian. Boyd is in Manchester. Boyd, I know you have thoughts on an inquiry, what sort of inquiry there should be, and who should lead it into these rape gangs. Tell us your thoughts on this one. Very interesting perspective.
Hello, Peter.
Hi.
Well, I don't think there should be an inquiry at all because they're just long-winded and they never get to the bottom of it. The questions the public want answered never get answered, and no one's ever held accountable. We just get told lessons will be learned. So I don't think that's what we need. What we need is a massive, well-funded criminal investigation. And I mean into everyone involved, councils, the police, the politicians, everyone that covered it up. And the only two people, me personally, I would trust to be honest and transparent and get the job done is Peter Blexley and Maggie Oliver.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They both know the police system. They work there. They've done very well.
Yeah.
They will spot lies. They will spot cover-ups. And personally, they're about the only two I'd trust. Independent.
And that is the fundamental point when you strip away everything else, Boyd, isn't it? It's about trust that any inquiry, whether it's a police inquiry, a criminal investigation, a special thing, independent investigation that you're advocating, Boyd, and I think it's a very, very good suggestion. The point is that so many people just don't trust the establishment, the police, the political parties, the councils anymore. And that's why we have to have so many independent things that have to be done. And it's a real problem. Obviously, the much bigger problem is what's actually happening here. The rape, the grooming, the horrendous crimes that are being committed against girls. Let's not call them young women. They are girls. They are children. And to actually get to the bottom of that and work out what has actually happened, we need to trust the mechanism that does that. And so many people just don't, Boyd.
This is it. But the mechanisms have proved themselves to be useless and at best, most, I think, corrupt. They've covered it up that much. They prove they're not trustworthy. They're proved an independent inquiry is never independent and never held to, no one's ever held to account. We need people that are honest, trustworthy, know the system, knows where the skeletons will be hidden, and criminal proceedings need to be put upon them all.
Yeah. And I think the question with any inquiry that happens or any investigation is, right, what happens now? Okay, you find all this stuff. What happens now? What's next? What are the what are the recommendations? And not just recommendations, not just, for example, the Alexis J report, right, there should now be a duty to report. People should have it should be criminally liable. If you don't report that child abuse has gone on, you will be prosecuted for that, which, to be honest, should have happened anyway. But it's about what happens next. It's not just about the inquiry itself. That's just the start in many of these occasions, Boyd, isn't it?
Well, that shouldn't have to be implicated. That should be a given.
Yeah, correct.
Absolutely. What is that 25 years later? Oh, we'll implement. Forget it. It should be a given you go to prison if you don't do your job and you allow this. You're complicit. And this is why we need trustworthy team to do it. And you're two people, the only people I trust, and that's the fact. Money isn't an object here. Forget money. We ain't got the money.
Find the money. Yeah, listen, Boyd, I think a lot of people are going to agree with you on that, and I think I agree with you on that. You make an awful lot of sense there, and I really, really appreciate your point and giving us a ring today on 0344 499 1000. That's Boyd in Manchester there. I want to play a couple of voice notes, firstly from Jason, who's in Romford on this particular issue. This is about a possible inquiry. This is what Jason has to say.
It's quite telling that these people are saying don't have an inquiry because it will cost lots of money, knowing full well it's literally a money sink for lawyers and experts that just make loads of money out of it, rather than let's have a quick one and find out the truth. This is what gets me. They know they are complete rip-offs in terms of the millions spent on them, so they're just suddenly now getting all righteous about not spending the money, rather than just saying let's have a proper inquiry and do it quickly.
That's a really, really good point. You'll forgive me for looking down during this. I'm actually trying to find an email that was sent from our boss telling us all the times that Keir Starmer has asked for an inquiry to be called. I'll see if Ryan, my producer, can find that. I can't find it on my phone just at the moment, but I'll get back to you perhaps after we play this next voice note from Bill, who's sent us a voice note. You can do this, by the way, 0344 499 1000. You just do it through WhatsApp. Bill in Angus has sent this on Ed Miliband.
Hi, Peter. Bill from Angus here. Great show, by the way. Really interested in the gas and electricity generation. I wonder what kind of idiots they are that's running this country who don't have enough storage for gas. Europe, Germany, France, all the rest of it, you've got an awful lot more than we do. I listen in astonishment to all the iterations that come from Miliband. The guy's an absolute nut job. Thanks again. Bye.
Thanks, Bill. I'm just going to be really pernickety about this, and maybe you disagree with me, and maybe you think I'm being too sensitive about this, but you know, calling people nut jobs, I probably wouldn't do it myself. I believe in free speech. Bill can say that. That's okay. He can say that if he wants to. But, you know, we don't know about Ed Miliband's mental health, and I think we need to just be a bit careful about that. But listen, say what you want. We will broadcast it. We did with Bill. Personally, I wouldn't use that language, but overall, I think, Bill, you've got a very, very good point there. I don't mean to be pernickety or silly or prissy about this, but it just slightly grinds me a wee bit. Christina says, good evening, Peter. The moment we have a blackout because we have no gas or electricity, Ed Miliband should resign. None of the front bench have a clue about business. Watching the mess we are in is shameful, says Christina. Right then, we heard a little bit earlier on from, I think it was Jason in Romford there, in regard to inquiries and people, you know, a lot of people say, oh, they're far too expensive. Let me just remind you about the number of times that Keir Starmer has called for an inquiry. 2020, Labour calls for an inquiry into the purchase of £50 million of unusable face masks. 2021, Labour calls for an inquiry into the Tory peer Michelle Moon over PPE contracts. 2021, Labour calls for an inquiry into David Cameron lobbying Rishi Sunak on COVID loans. 2021, Labour calls for an inquiry into the £200,000 revamp of the flat in number 10 Downing Street. Also in 2021, Labour calls for a transparent lobbying inquiry after texts in regard to James Dyson. 2022, Labour calls for an inquiry into a Liz Truss event. 2023, Labour calls for an inquiry into Steelworks regeneration after allegations of cronyism and backroom deals. 2023, Labour calls for an inquiry into English schools' £370 million budget bungle. 2024, Labour government would hold I'm not quite sure what that word, Amritsar raid inquiry, I'm not sure what that relates to, but certainly they wanted another inquiry into that. And in regard to the Battle of Orgreave, the Labour manifesto committed to an inquiry in 2024. So those are 10 separate occasions in the last 4 years, in the 4 years just passed, 5 years just passed, between 2020 and now. And Labour are saying that those things should have an inquiry. but they're saying that no national inquiry should be held into rape gangs. Let me know what you think about that. 0344 499 1000. We'll talk about the sport next here on Talk. Stay with us.
Apart from the Western world, we've had our time. That is the message. So surely, then, Elon Musk is evil to point out that, oh, well, the Western world kind of did good things. And maybe we need to look at how we can protect it and celebrate it and make sure it can go on being the bastions of progress in the world. Because, frankly, without Western civilization, we'd be in pretty dark ages. And yet, Western civilization is attacking itself.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, now it's time for
Sport Summary on Talk.
And Uma Gurov is with us, the Talk Sport reporter. Uma, great to see you in the studio. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, I'm definitely tired today, but I'm good.
Well, it's the end of the week, but the start of the weekend, there's lots to come because the FA Cup got underway last night. But there's been a bit of drama, hasn't there? Everton versus Peterborough. Everton won 2-0. But what happened with Ashley Young and his son Tyler?
Yeah, well, there was so much drama around this game. But yeah, Ashley Young obviously had the chance to play against his son, Tyler, who plays for Peterborough. And everyone was hoping that manager Ferguson would bring on Tyler Young to face his father, and he didn't. And obviously Everton, you know, kind of won this game 4-1. Perhaps there's arguments that, you know, he could have just brought him on. That this would have been historic because a father hasn't faced a son in a game for like 100 years or something. So
what's the age difference between them?
I think it's probably about 25, 30 years.
Okay.
So it would have been quite amazing because Ashley Young's been in the game for ages. I mean, he's been a legend for a couple of decades or so, and Tyler Young just coming into his own. I think he's still a teenager or thereabouts. So this would have been something quite marvellous. And I think on both sides, the teams were really upset. Everton team apparently quite angry that Ashley Young didn't get to do this. Peterborough fans, Everton fans, everyone's angry. But also there's the argument that, you know, Tyler Young isn't necessarily one of the first-string players for Peterborough. So bringing him on might just have been a sort of, oh, go on then, play your dad.
And you shouldn't really do that, should you?
Exactly.
You should choose the best players.
So, yeah, was the manager within his rights to do that?
I'd be a fantastic football manager.
But also, isn't this what the FA Cup is about? Like, the magic of the FA Cup, a dad playing his son, it would have been great. So I'm quite sad we didn't get to see that, but...
Let's hear what Darren Ferguson had to say. He defended leaving Ashley Young's son Tyler on the bench for the FA Cup tie.
Was it difficult to leave Tyler on the bench in the end, given his dad had obviously made it onto the pitch?
Very, very difficult. But I've got to do what I think is best for the team. I'm not, you know, as much as I wanted Tyler to get on. If the game had been 2-0 at that point, I would have put him on. But it's 1-0. I've got to get forward and I've got to try and get something out of the game. I've got to do what's best for my team. And we're not a charity case. You know, and as much as I wanted Tyler to get on with his dad, one of their players had a bit of a pop at me, which is bang out of order. You know, I've got to do what's best for our team. And at that point, at 1-0, I'm trying to get a result.
One of the players had a pop at him.
Yeah, I think there was a bit of conflict. The Peterborough fans and Peterborough players, and Everton players were all really angry that this piece of history hadn't been made, really. But yeah, you do have to say, I think, as a player, you can't be having a go at a manager for not bringing on a player just because he should have been able to play his father. Because there would be plenty of other Peterborough players who would have wanted to play against a Premier League team in the FA Cup. It's a big deal. So just because Tyler Young has a father on the other side, does that mean he should have played? I don't know. There's arguments on both sides, but yeah, it's certainly caused a bit of a storm today.
Big weekend, of course, coming up of FA Cup football on talkSPORT. What can we look forward to, Uma?
Yes, the magic of the FA Cup continues this weekend. There's a lot of David versus Goliath type fixtures happening this weekend. We've got Tamworth, who are the lowest side in this now. They're National League and they're up against Tottenham, and this is a huge fixture for someone like Tamworth, obviously. Tamworth, best known for being the birthplace of a former Prime Minister. Do you know which one?
Oh, wow. Wow. OK, didn't expect you to put me on the spot.
This is going to be up your street.
Hold on. Is it Edward Heath?
No.
Oh, no. Who?
Sir Robert Peel.
I didn't know that. Okay.
That's a bit of a niche
the
one.
19th century. Yeah.
But now they're best known for going up against Tottenham in the third round of the FA Cup.
I'm afraid you've taken the gloves off there. So I'm gonna put it back to you now and ask you.
Oh God, no,
who is the only Prime Minister born in Wales?
I have. Is it? Can I have a clue? Is it recent?
Yeah, very recent. Yeah.
Liz Truss.
Nope. Give you one more guess.
Theresa May.
The answer, I'm afraid, is Julia Gillard, the former Prime Minister of Australia, who was born in Barry in Wales. So there you go.
You didn't say she wasn't from England.
Well, that's the point. It's one of my favourite trick questions. Anyway, tell us about Accrington Stanley.
Accrington Stanley are up against Liverpool. This one will be live on talkSPORT. Again, this is a huge game for Accrington Stanley because a lot of them... There's a great interview, if you read the Times today, there's a great interview with some of the players. They're all Liverpool fans and they're talking about how they really want to get Mo Salah's shirt, Trent Alexander-Arnold's shirt after the game. And this kind of defines your season if you're a club like Accrington Stanley going up against Liverpool, potential Premier League winners here. You get to be up close and personal with these players and it's just, even if, you know, most likely result, of course, is that Liverpool would win. But you never know what might happen, and I think it's that underdog mentality. It's just one match, anything can happen, right?
Yeah,
so
of course.
This is why people
just give it a go and just play everybody, give everybody a go. I remember back in the day, my dad and my brother are huge fans of our local club in Northern Ireland, Glenavon Football Club, and back in the day, I was quite a big fan when I was at school, and I was about 11 or 12, and they got through to, I think, UEFA League, UEFA Cup, something like that. And it was, they got Werder Bremen. And this was literally like a local club, guys being paid 200 quid a week, you know, part-time players, training a couple of times a week, match on Saturdays. Really, most people volunteers. And the club doctor, really nice guy, actually was who's I've known him for years. He got me all the signatures of all the players and everything. And it was I just remember watching it. The home game was lovely because there were these really nice Germans from Werder Bremen supporters who were like, they really couldn't speak very much English, but they were like offering us sweets and stuff and hi and lovely to see and all the rest of it. And then I went to the club where they had a big screen of the away leg. and they had like our manager, who was just like this local guy, and you know all the full commentary and all the graphics and everything. It was just very, very surreal. So I can totally appreciate how big a deal this is, especially when you get through a few different rounds and you're playing someone like Tottenham or Manchester United or Liverpool. I mean that's a huge thing, and it's a huge money thing for the clubs as well, isn't it?
Yeah, because some of these games are going to be televised on the BBC. Can you imagine? And as you mentioned, some of them are part-time, so technically this could be like me or you, Peter, just on the side playing for one of these National League teams after.
I don't think it would be me. I don't think it would be me. I was often I was often chosen last. In 1995, Werder Bremen won 2-0 at our. I mean, how they didn't thump us, I don't know. I think they won 5-0 in Germany as well. But listen, it was a great memory, and we knew we weren't going to win anyway. Anyway, that's all a long time ago. Let's talk about something also in the past. Only yesterday, in fact, we broke the news on this programme that Everton had sacked their manager, Sean Dyche. Who are the early frontrunners to take over? David Moyes in the frame?
David Moyes is the front runner, and Everton are looking to make this happen as soon as possible. They're in talks today. We could hear anything pretty much any second. Obviously, David Moyes, former manager of Everton, managed them from 2002 to 2013, and he got them to a really stable position by the time he left. Everton now obviously completely unrecognisable from when he was there. They're under their new owners, the Friedkin Group. They're about to move into a new stadium next season. The problem is they're 16th in the Premier League. They've only picked up 3 wins. This is not looking good for Everton, because if they get relegated, they're trying to move into this new stadium to boost their profits. But if they drop into the Championship, all that goes out the window. They're already kind of hundreds of millions of pounds of debt. The fans are not happy. They've been struggling for like seasons and seasons. They've never quite been relegated. But you just sort of sense, like Sean Dyche said, I just can't keep them up. And I think that's why he parted ways with Everton and they sacked him. But David Moyes is a sort of a specialist in keeping them up. But yeah, they need to.
But
do
also,
this fast.
one doesn't necessarily follow the other, though, does it?
Well, exactly.
You know,
and they can't keep on doing this. Like, is David Moyes the long-term fix here? How are they going to make sure that when he goes, because no manager lasts forever, that this doesn't happen again to Everton? They need to get themselves back to a point where they were in the 80s when they were winning top-flight titles. And looking at Everton now, they just don't have the financial power to bring in players. They have no freedom over transfers. The fans are not on board. Something I think radical needs to change, and you sense it's probably more than just management.
Let's talk tennis. The first Grand Slam is about to get underway. Lots of British interest, but a slightly odd story regarding Emma Raducanu and bites. Tell us a bit more about that.
This is remarkable. Ahead of the Australian Open starting on Sunday, Emma Raducanu revealed yesterday she basically got picked up some ant bites out in Australia ahead of the first match.
Yeah, these things happen,
It's really normal, could happen to me or you. But she said she was offered an antiseptic spray to treat those bites, and she decided against it. And the reason she did that is because she was afraid that it might come up in her doping tests. Now, if we look back over the last kind of couple of months, years, a lot of tennis stars, Jannik Sinner, Iga Swiatek, have been caught up in doping allegations. They've been accused of breaching those doping regulations, and a lot of the kind of appeals have then come back and found that it was contaminated substances. So Jannik Sinner's was a spray that was on his hand, and it kind of contaminated him and made his drug test show up as positive, which, well, that is still under under review because the anti-doping agency have now contested that. So it's becoming a really grey area, and I think this is something...
We've got a red area.
Well,
scratching.
Indeed. Very scratchy area. But...
A scratchy issue, yeah. No, listen, I mean, this is tough, actually, when you're making that kind of decision. And I know we're joking about it, but it can't be nice for Emma Raducanu.
No, but to not be able to use something which you should just be able to use because you're
all of
afraid
us wouldn't think twice about using it, yeah.
Exactly, because people who get banned, they miss loads and loads of tournaments.
It's terrible for your reputation, for sponsorship, and all the rest of it, yeah.
Yeah, so I think there needs to be better regulations coming in here, and something needs to change, because if tennis players are scared to use medical products, that's not going to be good for them on the court, is it?
Uma, thanks for your thoughts on all of that. Uma Gurov there, who is a TalkSport reporter. We'll hear from her again before too long. Let's hear now from Anne in Sussex on rape gangs. Anne, you're very welcome to the programme. 0344 499 1000 is the number that she has called. You can too. Anne, what are your thoughts?
Oh, Peter, this is the most horrendous subject.
Isn't it? Yeah, you're absolutely right.
But the point that I rang about is people like me, we can't do anything about the criminals, the crime, all that has gone on, the way that those in power have ignored what's gone on. But I am calling for actually proper support and counselling for the victims.
Yeah.
And I don't mean a few hours of talking and therapy. I mean the kind of counselling that Margaret Bamford used to give victims of torture. Because any young person, any person who's been through the rape and abuse that these young people have been through, it is torture, and it damages not only them, it damages their children if they have them. It damages generations. And until we deal with it properly, the victims will always be suffering.
Do you have confidence that we can deal with this big problem as a society, Anne? Because I'm not hearing a lot of confidence from many people in so many ways, not just in regard to counselling, not just in regard to helping those people, in regard to helping them not get into those situations in the first place where they're actively targeted by these horrendous people, these awful criminals. And just, you know, whether you want a national inquiry, whether you don't, to me, there just seems to be a complete lack of confidence in so many people that these things can be solved in any way, that things can get better.
Peter, I don't have confidence. I've been involved in vulnerable families, children, for goodness, it must be 50 years. And the people that earn high-powered jobs and are trained at university to deal with our vulnerable people, many of them haven't got the skills. I don't know what's gone on. They haven't got the skills. They do not believe the victims. They have not believed the victims. And it's something wrong rot in our society that we are all responsible for all of our children. But some children don't matter as much as others. And we've left them to their own devices. When they've come for help, we've sent them away. I've seen it in the front line. And I don't know if we're really going to deal with it now.
Yeah. And very wise thoughts there, and it is a bleak picture, and I really want to thank you for ringing in and giving your thoughts and experience and analysis there, and that's really, really welcomed and really appreciated, Anne. You're a thoughtful, intelligent person. I know you've rung me on a few occasions, and it's always good to hear from you, no matter what you say, even if it is that bleak diagnosis. So thank you to Anne. 0344 499 1000 is the number you can ring. And thank you to Cliff in Berkshire, who says, I support the call for a national inquiry into the rape gangs. However, it needs to be a broad scope and to be allowed to go where the evidence leads. I don't trust Labour nor the Conservatives to set one up that will go to the heart of the matter. Thank you, Cliff. I think a lot of people don't trust the authorities, the political parties, and that's at the heart of this problem. That's why Peter Blexley and Maggie Oliver would be the dream team for me to get to the bottom of this and to sort this out once and for all. Let me know your thoughts on it. 0344 499 1000. We'll talk more about Labour and China. We'll also ask whether ex-convicts can be just as reliable as other staff. That is what the Prisons Minister thinks. What do you think? Let me know. Stay with us.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good evening. This is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell here for the next hour, and then Kevin O'Sullivan will be here between 7 and 10 in various forms, 7 and 9 in this studio, and then between 9 and 10 with What Just Happened. You can tune in for all of that. You can also let us know your thoughts on any of the stories that we're discussing this evening, whether it's me, whether it's Kevin, 0344 499 1000. In a moment, we'll talk about Labour and China. Rachel Reeves is jetting there as we speak to talk to the Deputy Premier of China. We'll also talk about ex-convicts. Are they just as reliable as other staff? That's what the prison minister, Lord Timpson, says. He's employed quite a few of them. We'll talk about Donald Trump being sentenced in New York. He's got an unconditional discharge, which basically means, look, justice has been done. Off you go. Cheerio. We'll talk to Tom Del Baccaro, the former chairman of the California Republican Party, and we'll take your thoughts on all of this. Loads of really interesting messages coming into this building, and indeed on my Twitter as well. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a text message, 87222, with the word talk in your text. You can send me a voice note. We've had some of those as well. Send it through WhatsApp on the main number, 0344 499 1000. You can also send me a WhatsApp text message or give me a ring. Yeah, do that too. Sounds pretty old-fashioned, but I love talking to callers. I'd love to talk to as many of you as possible between now and 7. Whatever your opinion, whether you think I'm right, whether you think I'm wrong, whether you think James Timpson or Rachel Reeves is right, let me know. 0344 499 1000. Let's get started here on Talk. I haven't read too many tweets this evening. Let me just read a couple of them here because there's some really, really good ones coming through. Peter, does Ed Miliband have a heat pump installed in his own house? Does number 10 have a heat pump? After all, they keep on about leading by example. Very, very good point. Thank you to this person who says, if the chairman of the Black Police Officers Association sent the WhatsApp messages from his own phone in his own time, then I don't see a problem. If he sent them from a work phone in work time, then he got what he deserved. Thank you to Angela who says, trust is a real problem. We do not trust the police or counsellors or social workers to do any inquiry. It has to be an outsider from another country. It's sad, but it's true. I want people criminalised from the rape gang cover-up and what's going on now exposed. Thank you to Angela for that. Victoria says, why did police officers in multiple forces decide to ignore the age of consent laws? If they were acting collectively, who authorised the suspension of the law? All these questions have to be answered. On whether we should call Ed Miliband a nut job or not. Someone did earlier. I think we probably shouldn't. Robert says, Peter, Miliband is a nut job. Simple as that. Everyone knows it. The caller is correct. It grinds me he is being allowed to get away with being a complete and utter clown. It is our money he is wasting. Call him a clown, by all means. Nut job, probably wouldn't use that language. Where was Lloyd George born, says Peter. Lloyd George was born in Manchester. He was, of course, Welsh, but the question was, name me the Prime Minister born in Wales, to which the answer is Julia Gillard. Lloyd George was born in Manchester, although he was, of course, Welsh. Anyway, let's talk about another Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and his right-hand woman, Rachel Reeves. She is jetting as we speak to Beijing. She will meet the Deputy Premier there of the Chinese Communist Party, and there'll be lots of discussion there about growth, about whether China can invest in this country. David Cogan is the director of Labour List. He's also the author of Protest and Power, the Battle for the Labour Party. David, thanks for joining me this evening. The Conservatives say, the Conservatives say, David, that that Rachel Reeves shouldn't be on her way to China at all. She should be here dealing with the markets in free fall, the problems with the pound and all the rest of it. I mean, this has been a long planned trip. Should it go ahead, and do you think the Chinese are the ones who get us out of the economic umschau that we're in at the moment?
Well, I think the trip was inevitable. In fact, I think on your news bulletin, your political correspondent made the same point, which is that if you're going to go to China and meet the Chinese government, you need to send somebody with sufficient levels of seniority. They've been planned for a long time, so I'm not surprised. But the timing is fairly dismal. It's interesting, actually, just looking at the shot of people walking away. You've got another Minister of the Treasury who's currently under investigation as well. So they're not having a good time at the Treasury at the moment.
That's Tulip Sadiq, and she is in charge of the fight against corruption. And there's a suggestion, which she denies, that she may be either corrupt herself or in cahoots with people who are corrupt. She, of course, denies all of that. But Labour on the back foot in regard to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, you know, the Treasury team must feel themselves under enormous pressure now, and it's pressure that's partially due to world markets and the bond markets, and it's partially due to government economic action over the last 4 or 5 months. And a lot of criticism is now being attracted by Rachel Reeves in a way that certainly wasn't the case 6 months ago within the Labour Party before the election.
David, I just wonder about Rachel Reeves's personal positions. A very good column in the Times today by Patrick Maguire, who is, of course, the sort of chief Labour criminologist, really. He's got a book out next month, which is, I mean, the content's great, but really it has been proofread brilliantly by some sort of expert who I imagine is incredibly handsome and probably very intelligent as well. But anyway, aside from that, David, in regard to Rachel Reeves's...
And he's now a presenter, presumably, on tour.
I mean, you may say that, I couldn't possibly comment.
Right.
In terms of what is Rachel Reeves's personal position, how do you assess that? Because there are a lot of senior Labour people not too happy.
Well, I think Patrick's piece, which I read, and I agree with you, Patrick is the foremost commentator on all things Labour. And I think, you know, the point about this, going back over the last couple of years, is that Keir Starmer became leader of the Labour Party, having had really no background whatsoever in economics or in economic management. So he relied enormously on Rachel Reeves, who claimed to have been an economist, was an economist at the Bank of England, and he basically gave over all economic policy making to his shadow chancellor, who became his chancellor. And what history tells us is that all prime ministers who do this learn to regret it, because ultimately a government is led by a prime minister, and the economics practiced by that government determine whether it succeeds or fails. And so, you know, I think Rachel Reeves was given enormous amounts of authority and power, enormous amounts of trust, and clearly they have been making mistakes. I mean, clearly, you know, the winter fuel allowance and the announcement of that, the length of time it took to do the budget, what was in the budget, which I think is highly debatable, has now resulted in, you know, a significant problem in terms of economics. And
you're absolutely right, David. Sorry to interrupt you, but you're bang on there. I mean, usually the point of a budget, and I was in government for 3.5 years under the Conservatives, and the thing with the budget, the question always is, have you sort of slightly got away with it? Is there some vast flaw in this budget, or indeed a manifesto, or many other of these big announcements that you can almost sort of get away with it? Has it landed okay? Are people all right with it? And here we are, you know, 10, 11 weeks on, still talking about things like national insurance, still talking about the winter fuel allowance. It has not been a successful budget.
Well, it hasn't. And I mean, I think, you know, if one's going to be clear about this, when 3 years ago Rachel Reeves decided that they weren't going to do anything about personal income tax, weren't going to do anything about VAT, and weren't going to do anything about personal national insurance, when they boxed themselves in 3 years ago and therefore blamed the Conservatives for the Conservatives' ruinous economic theories of the previous 5 or 6 years, including, of course, Liz Truss, the assumption was there'll be enough wiggle room. There'd be enough wiggle room in what they were able to do when they got into power that they wouldn't actually regret that decision. And actually what's turned out, which I do think was in fact predictable, was 2 things. First of all, guess what? You get rid of winter fuel allowance and there's a freezing cold winter. I mean, that story is being told for the last 100 years in politics. And the second thing is, if you put all the blame, all the financial pressure, and I speak as somebody who owns 2 small businesses. On small businesses, with national insurance and employment, you have a direct impact on the employment market and direct impact on growth. And she boxed herself in 3 years ago, really. And unfortunately now, the markets are having their say, and we're seeing what are really difficult problems in terms of further economics. And that relies on now either more tax increases or even bigger cuts to public services and public spending, which is going to be a real problem for a Labour government. And ultimately, the problem will be Keir Starmer's.
David, you mentioned Liz Truss and her crashing the economy there. Perhaps the two of us can share a cell when she sues us. What do you make of this, Roy? Keir Starmer standing by his claim that Liz Truss crashed the economy. She has threatened to sue him, taking a civil action, sent him a solicitor's letter, basically, a thing called a cease and desist about this. I thought Liz Truss was for free speech.
Well, I couldn't comment on Liz Truss' view on free speech. I think it's commonly accepted that the economy for the, 8 or 9 weeks that Liz Truss was Prime Minister, went through a disastrous cycle. I don't think anyone has disputed that, including actually the Conservative Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who succeeded her. I suppose the question that has to be asked now is, given the statistics that are now affecting both the pound and the bond markets, whether Labour is now going to be compared to what happened during that period with Liz Truss. So I don't know if that's what I've just said is something she could sue on, but I don't think there's much dispute that the period of economic mismanagement under that particularly short-term government was blamed both by Conservatives and by Labour for Rishi Sunak's problems for the following 2 years.
Would you rather have the top bunk or the bottom bunk, David?
I think, Peter, you're probably younger than me. In fact, you're definitely younger than me. I think you should be on the top bunk.
Okay, all right, no problem. Yeah. That's a deal. Is Britain back under union control, as Cammy Badenoch says? Is the Labour Party, in your estimation, as the director of Labour List and author of Protest and Power, the battle for the Labour Party, is Labour under union control? I mean, you could argue, I suppose, that the rises given to the junior doctors and the ASLEF train drivers were, quite significant rises. Some people say they had to happen for those disputes to end. But under union control, I'm not sure I agree with Kemi Badenoch on that.
No, I mean, I think it'd be interesting actually to talk about Kemi Badenoch at some point on your show. We probably don't have time now. I mean, she does. There's quite a lot to attack this Labour government for. Even those of us who are Labour supporters would accept this Labour government. It's got plenty to be attacked about. She does choose weird points of argument. I mean, there is no doubt that solving the junior doctors' strike was a priority for an incoming government. I have to say, I think now they probably wonder whether giving the railway drivers quite such large increases when they did it was a particularly good idea. But the idea that this government is beholden to the unions is not only wrong. I think actually once you now see further pay settlements in the public sector, you're going to see this government probably at odds with the unions, and because they're not going to have the money to put through the increases unions will want. So already, I think it's a strange argument that Badenoch is putting forward, and probably not the point of attack that she's wise to make.
Well, let's give you a couple of minutes, David. We'll push the break a little bit. Tell us your thoughts on Kemi Badenoch. I'm interested in terms of the job she's done so far from your perspective as Director of Labour List. What do you make of it?
Well, if you are a natural Labour supporter and you're looking at how well or badly this government's doing, you have cause to be concerned. Except when you look at the Conservative Party and you look at the polling and you look at the way in which they're trying to land attacks. And I find it, as an outsider to the Conservative Party, very puzzling, actually. I mean, you ended up with a leadership election between Badenoch and Robert Jenrick, and clearly nobody in the Conservative Party thought they were going to have that. They thought Cleverly would be the new leader of the Tory Party. And I do believe, I have no bias here, James Cleverly, having held both Foreign Secretary and Home Secretary, is a politician of weight who would have given Labour quite a lot.
I think he's going to be the leader going into the election. I don't think Kemi Badenoch's going to stay leader.
Okay, but I bow to your greater knowledge than mine. But
not necessarily. It's just my gut instinct. It's not based on anything.
Landing. If she was put in there to put the boot in opposition for 2 years and then come up with policies that were capable of dragging the Conservatives back into government, there is literally no sign whatsoever she's doing either of those things at the moment, at a time when you would think the government was pretty vulnerable to an effective opposition attack. And so, in some ways, the battle on the right between Farage and Badenoch is almost, the battle that most people on the right are focusing on, not the battle with the Labour government, which from Keir Starmer's point of view is very good news, in truth.
Yeah, I used to call myself the Professor Neil Ferguson of political prediction, in that everything I said was always wrong. But my thoughts are that it'll actually be Cleverly versus West Streeting, and I think the most likely outcome of the next election is a Labour-Lib Dem coalition. I wonder what you make of that, David.
Well, I don't believe that Keir Starmer will be deposed as leader of the Labour Party or Prime Minister, because the Labour Party actually, apart from anything else, almost never does it. In fact, I can't think of a time.
They love a loser as well. They love Neil Kinnock.
Well, yeah, but Kinnock wasn't Prime Minister.
Yeah,
I mean, the point is, of those Labour leaders who become Prime Minister, none of them have been deposed in office. You could argue Tony Blair had pressure put on him, but that was after 10 years, and he had Gordon Brown in the wing. So
jangling the keys.
I do think Keir Starmer will be the Labour leader and Prime Minister who goes into the next election. Against James Cleverly, I think it's entirely possible if the Conservative Party hasn't taken entire leave of its senses. But to be frank, the evidence the last 2 or 3 years, in fact, the evidence the last 5 or 6 years in the Tory Party, for those of us who aren't in it, is that it does appear to have taken complete leave of its senses. So a Lib Lab Pat, I do think if you look at the polls, I think that's not a bad bet at all. If 3 years from now, if the Lib Dems, who nobody ever talks about, but people forget have a sizable number of MPs, the Lib Dems are still polling in the way they are now, you could easily see there being an alliance on the centre-left to oppose what might be happening on the centre-right.
Yeah, or even more, or even further right than the centre-right. Very, very interesting talking to you, David. Let's chat again soon and for longer. David Cogan there, Director of Labour List and author of Protest and Power, the Battle for the Labour Party. Thanks to everybody who's been in touch, including Dawn in Chelmsford, who says, "Hi Peter, surely an individual minister like Rachel Reeves would be fully briefed by finance experts. Is the budget really left to her judgment?" I mean, it is and it isn't, Dawn. I mean, the civil service... Michael Heseltine used to call the civil service like a Rolls Royce to be driven. Essentially, you tell the civil service what you want to do. You say, this is the direction, these are my decisions on these particular issues, give me all the information, then I as Chancellor make a decision, then you go off and do it. That's how it's meant to work anyway. And certainly, you know, there would have been not a single word in the budget without Rachel Reeves' approval. Some people say that she's controlled by the Treasury. Sometimes people say that she controls the Treasury. It depends on the Chancellor, really. Dawn also says, oh no, sorry, I've just read that out. Peter in Gordon says, "For the record, I agree that Mr Miliband is an ideological nut job. No question about that. You may not agree, but I doubt that I am alone." Not zero might be a better way of putting it. I think we can agree on that, Peter. I don't know whether you're in Gordon or your surname is Gordon. There's some Gordon aspect to it. He's either Peter Gordon or Peter in Gordon. Perhaps tell me the next time. Maybe your name's Peter Gordon. I'll stop saying this now. I'll just stop talking and we'll go to a break. Because next we're talking about former convicts. Are they just as reliable as other people? That is the view of the Prisons Minister. Let me know what you think. 0344 499 1000. We'll discuss that next here on Talk.
We need to get tough on deporting people who come to our country and then break the law. We need to get really tough like other sensible countries do. And if the law doesn't allow us to do that, then let's change the law. And if international laws don't allow us to do that, then let's derogate from those international laws, because you don't get away with this sort of stuff in other countries. So how is it that Britain has become some kind of sponge for these characters?
Apart from the Western world, we've had our time. That is the message. So surely, then, Elon Musk is evil to point out that, oh, well, the Western world kind of did good things. And maybe we need to look at how we can protect it and celebrate it and make sure it can go on being the bastions of progress in the world. Because, frankly, without Western civilization, we'd be in pretty dark ages. And yet, Western...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Cliff in Berkshire, who says Kemi needs to lead the party if she's the leader and wants to be a serious politician in the eyes of the public. She seems to have shied away from leading, in my opinion, says Cliff in Berkshire. Kevin in Sheffield says, good evening, Peter. Great show. Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate that. I'm 60 years old and I've voted in every general election since I was old enough to vote. I really thought my vote counted, but looking at how our great country is now run down, brackets down, I really think my vote is immaterial. Although I didn't vote for her, the last good leader we had was Margaret Thatcher. I honestly think the current crop of Starmer, Cooper, Lammy and the crazy Ed Miliband are gaslighting the nation. Very sad times indeed. Says Kevin in Sheffield. I've been offered a bet. I haven't accepted the bet. I've not shaken hands. I am not. Piers Morgan is not here. Neither is Rishi Sunak. Adrian Baird has been in touch and he says, sorry Peter, absolute nonsense about a Liberal Democrat Labour pact. I'll give you 10 monkeys to 2. Reform will win an outright majority. Now, Tech Up Dave has been on the Google, and a monkey is a Cockney rhyming slang for £500. So apparently, I need to bet £1,000. I don't really have £1,000 to bet, to be honest. But if I win, I get £5,000. Is that correct, Adrian? What happens if neither of those things happen? What happens if Reform don't win an outright majority? And what happens if there isn't a Liberal Democrat Labour pact either? Say that again, Dave? Oh, Dave gets the money. No, Dave doesn't get any money. Dave can get one of these Fitbits. That's what he can get. So I was interviewing a woman the other day about Belgian chocolate crunches, and she sent me some of them. We're eating them, which is very kind of her. Adrian, I'm not going to accept your bet. If it's a bit less, if it's maybe like, I don't know, a £5 or something, I can probably do that. If you want to text in again, you're very, very welcome. But I was interested in the monkeys aspect of it, especially it would put me in mind of the Simpsons episode, I don't know if you've seen it, where Bart rings a radio station as a competition and you can win $10,000 or an elephant. And he says, I'll take the elephant, please. They say, no, really, we're giving you the $10,000. And he says, no, I want the elephant. I'll have my elephant, please. Eventually, they give him an elephant. And there's a whole controversy about it. And Kent Brockman, who is the local newsman, has a little segment on the TV and he goes, isn't that what we're all asking? Where's my elephant? It's a brilliant episode. Right then, let's talk about prison reform, because ex-convicts can be just as reliable as other staff. This is according to the Prisons Minister, James Timpson. He is, of course, behind Timpsons, the locksmiths and soul and heel bar, basically, as they used to be called. He has employed loads of former convicts and really changed their life around. I've spoken to him, actually, previously when I was in government. He is a really, really interesting character, and the fact that he's now Prisons Minister I think is probably a good thing, because he really properly understands it, unlike, a lot of jobbing politicians. Johnny Gilbert understands it too, because he's a former prisoner himself who was sentenced to 12 years. He served 6 of them for fraud. He's now studying and teaching. He's a prison reform advocate. Johnny, do you honestly think that the public, first of all, do you think James Timpson is right to say that ex-convicts can be just as reliable as other staff? And secondly, do you think he's right to have said it?
Yes, thank you for the invitation, Peter. Nice to meet you. For sure, he is very right. I was in prison for 6 years. There were some offenders who left prison and reoffended. They were even reoffending whilst in prison, selling drugs and being involved in violent acts. But there is a significant proportion of prisoners who do seek the rehabilitation route. They look out for vocational courses, education, training, in order that they can change their pathway on release. So he is very right. I think now he's in government, he probably needs to be a little bit more careful as to how he says things and approaches things, to make sure it's obviously government lined as well. But no, I think he's a very wise appointment. I was away for 6 years, from 2014 to 2020. Over that time, we had 6 ministers of justice. So you need people who are going to stay in a job, get to know where they are, and somebody who's got that experience of the prison system rehabilitation. And obviously their company has turned the lives around for so many former offenders who are now working for Timpsons, or they've gone on to work for other companies. When I was in an open prison, at any one time we had 15 to 20 offenders there who would go and work for Timpson's in Cardiff, in Newport, in any of the big cities around where the prison was located. So I've seen firsthand the sort of great work that Timpson's do, and a number of other companies as well.
It's interesting, though, that he has said employers are looking for people who want to work, who are reliable, honest, and from my experience as an employer, the people you recruit from prison are just as likely to be as good as someone who hasn't been to prison if you pick the right people. And
yeah.
I mean, that's, I think, probably demonstrably true, but there will be a lot of people who will say, hold on a second here, I've never broken the law, I've never done anything wrong legally. I'm not talking about myself personally, I'm just talking about people in the country necessarily, who will say, I've never been to prison, I've never done anything wrong, and here is a government minister, not just an employer, not just someone who's done, a huge amount of work and very admirable work in regard to rehabilitation in this country, but a government minister saying that ex-criminals can be just as likely to be reliable, honest and good as any other candidate. So is that an insult to people who haven't broken the law, perhaps?
I could see both points of the argument there. From my perspective, if you have the opportunity to work in a Timpson store, you've come right through the system.
Yeah.
You've gone through the closed estate, you've gone through perhaps category A, B, C, you're in D. So you've already proven yourself. You've had, risk assessments.
Not everybody makes that whole way through, and there are a lot of people in prison.
No, that's right.
And there are a lot of people in prison who are never rehabilitated. There are just bad people in prison.
Correct, there are for sure. Yeah. So no, I've seen firsthand the sort of good work that sort of, employment opportunity and training can give to people. But like I said, it's, there's only between 2,000 and 4,000 people in the open estate at the moment. And that's why the government have recently called for more open places. And I think that would assist. The problem is in the closed estate, it really is hard to be rehabilitated. You get regular shutdowns if there's any security issues or whatever. When I was working in education at a prison in Bridgend, a G4S prison, my classes would be stopped. Yeah. I was a mentor and I was also studying there. So it's very fragile. Yeah. So you've got all the ability to connect to rehabilitation and restorative justice, but they are like connectors, and you just need to make sure they connect, and a lot of them don't, unfortunately, and that's why we have such fallout. Talking
about the fast turnover in the Ministry of Justice, I actually worked there as a special advisor. I was someone who advised Robert Buckland, who was then the Justice Secretary, for 6 months until a man called Dominic Cummings, you may have heard of, sacked me. He is, which I wear as a bit of a badge of honour. But the point I made, I'm not a member of the Conservative Party anymore, I haven't been for years, but the point I made at the time was, you can say as much as you want, hang him, flog him, throw away the key, all that kind of stuff. But the point is that the vast majority of people who are in prison, unless you're Rose West or Wayne Couzens, there's about 75 people who have whole life tariffs. Very few of them in comparison. Not even, not even as many thousands as are in the prison estates. So there's about 80,000 people in prison today. There aren't even 80 people who have whole life tariffs. Most people are going to get out. What do you want them to do? Do you want them to have a job, have a home, be a productive member of society, pay tax, or do you want to do none of the things that you can do when they're captive and actually not rehabilitate them and just throw away the key and then say, well, you're going to reoffend again? Not that that's right or can ever be right, but if nothing is done to rehabilitate, the likelihood is they're going to be recidivists, they're going to offend again, go back into prison and charge the taxpayer 50 grand a year to keep them in there, or if they're in a young offenders institution, something like 170 grand a year. So from my perspective, there was actually a very strong conservative argument, small c and big C, for rehabilitation, and that was the argument that I was putting forward.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think as a society, we need to decide what we want to do. Is it to punish, or is it to rehabilitate and welcome back former offenders?
And some people need to be punished. There's no doubt about that.
I did.
I get that.
And Peter, I served 12 years. I was a solicitor and I acted in a large banking fraud. I had life chances that so many others don't have in prison, and I squandered all those. So
why did you do it?
What's that, sorry?
Why did you do it?
Why did I do it? I was acting, my kind of ethics slipped away. I started acting for this charismatic Virgin Airline pilot. He asked me to do a few dishonest things, and I just graduated to doing kind of illegality, really. This informed my research. I did a PhD where I looked at mortgage fraud and bank fraud conspiracies. I speak widely on that. I work with financial institutions in assisting them with their fraud proofing and their fraud prevention algorithms, etc., to identify that. But I can look at myself in the shaving mirror again. I couldn't whilst I was offending. I'm incredibly lucky that I've had a second chance. I had UWE Law School in Bristol. They employed me. I lecture in criminal law and financial crime there, so I can assist undergraduates who are interested in that area as well as postgraduates. So I'm just sitting in a very good place now because I was lucky enough to be able to find that route. And that's given me a completely new career and a fresh start. So I'm very much behind giving all prisoners the opportunity where they perform and where they go through. When you go into prison, you're standard, then you become enhanced, and you've got to do the vocational stuff. There's a lot of scrutiny of your behaviour and activities whilst in prison, certainly in the closed estates. But when you get to an open prison, you're allowed then to spend some time with your family. And as you say, if a prisoner can be released and they've got a little bit of money in their bank account, they have a job, they have accommodation, they have family connections, then that's where you're going to reduce the impact of recidivism.
And actually, there's some very, first of all, that's fascinating to hear, Johnny, and thank you for sharing your story with us. The other thing, just another sort of bugbear of mine, and we actually, is one of the few things that I actually did that was of any use during that 6 months, was actually saying maybe we shouldn't let people out on Friday afternoons. Maybe we should let them out on other days, because if you are let out on a Friday afternoon, there aren't any services. You get out of a prison, and there's nothing for you. Everything's closed. There aren't ways to get accommodation and so on. And the people who are waiting there are the drug dealers who say, do a little job for us, we'll give you a bed for the night.
Yeah, no, indeed, and you get kind of £47 or £50 or whatever it is, and that is it.
Yeah.
And I came out during COVID, and obviously all of the support services. I was fortunate enough, I've got a wonderful wife and a family, and I was welcome home again. I was finishing my PhD at Cardiff. I was teaching there as well, so I had that. I didn't have to sofa surf. I didn't have to live on the streets. I had family.
But you're the exception rather than the rule, Johnny, let's face it.
Well, you're right, yes. But, if we think about perhaps, making sure rehabilitation works better in our criminal justice system and giving prisoners the opportunity to prove themselves, okay? There was people working at Timpson's who didn't.
Yeah.
Even when I was there and some were drinking up on camp and then they would get sent back to closed estate again. They let down Timpson's. Timpson's would have to deal with a headache about somebody not showing up for work the following day. But there are, the larger proportion of people who've come through that, and they've come through it well, and then they've got a new chance now. And, I hope, like me, they'll embrace that and move forward.
Thank you so much. It's been really interesting talking to you. Let's chat again. That is Johnny Gilbert there.
Peter.
He's a prison reform advocate. He served 6 years in prison. He was sentenced to 12 years for fraud. He's now studying and teaching, and really, really interesting to chat to him. I wonder what you think about it as well. 0344 499 1000. Thank you so much to him for that. A lot of food for thought there as well. He is someone who's turned his life around from the illegal criminal things he did. He's paid his debt to society and now he's giving something back. It would be wonderful if more former prisoners did that. Certainly other people do it in different ways. For example, working for Timpson's and businesses like them that do give people a second chance. Let me know your thoughts on this. 0344 499 1000. We'll talk about Donald Trump, who's got an unconditional discharge in New York. So he's got a sentence, but essentially it's right. Justice has been done. Off you go and be president. I'm sure a sigh of relief for him, especially as in about 10 days' time, he's going to be president for a second time. Stay with us here on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, during the break, I've just received the loveliest photograph of my cousin's child. Her name is Rebecca McCune, and she has graduated with a BA in midwifery with first-class honours from the University of York. And I just want to say a massive congratulations from Rebecca. She's taken, she's done a great work, and she is going to be a midwife in York, and she's a very, very wonderful young woman. We're all very proud of her. So I just want to use my presenter privilege to say that. Donald Trump has been sentenced in New York to an unconditional discharge. This essentially means justice has been done, nothing to see here particularly. Tom Del Beccaro is the former chairman of the California Republican Party. Tom, thank you for joining me this evening. What's your reaction to this?
Thanks for having me on, and I've been an attorney for 37 years.
So you know about unconditional discharges?
My reaction is that this is an awful lot of money being spent saying, okay, you can just leave the courtroom. And I think a lot of Americans will look at it that way. Why did we do all this if it was going to be your intention? There
will be others, Tom, won't there, who will look at this and say, hold on a second, he was found guilty of committing 34 felonies. Surely he should be banged up.
Yeah, they will say those sort of things. And there's going to be those center left to left who will say, well, he's got a scarlet letter F on his jacket saying felony or felon for the rest of his life, although most of us who practice know this will be overturned. But that, you know, America has jumped the shark from it. We used to just attack each other in the halls of Congress. Then we started investigating each other. I'm using the royal we, if I'm allowed to say that. You are. On your show. And
we're a British show. We try to encourage that, Tom. And the point you're making, I think, is a very good one, because I think there is a question to be asked, whether you think Donald Trump is guilty of sin and Stormy Daniels shouldn't have got the money, blah, blah, blah. I mean, is this politics or is this justice? I mean, and is it a bit of both? I'm just sort of fascinated and appalled in equal measure by all of this in New York, particularly in the New York courts.
Yeah, well, if you look over my shoulder, I wrote a book called The Divided Era, which explains the sources of current American division today, which goes beyond normal levels of division. And so the politicians are ramping this up, and this division started really with the Clinton era is when it exploded, of course, with the Republican investigation of him. It got very intense, and it's been getting more and more intense. In 2015, Rick Perry was going to run for president, former Texas governor. He was indicted. It was overturned. So this has been growing and growing. So if you're on the right, you think that this is lawfare. If you're on the left, you think it's justice. And the problem is that America has two different medias, and they don't meet.
You're absolutely right. Listen, fascinating talking to you. And I just wonder, as Trump becomes president for a second time in 10 days' time, where does this leave him, do you think? Because people are going to take from this essentially what they want to take from this. It's sort of an extension, I suppose, of the point you've just made there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first 150 days are going to be so incredibly busy for him, because I tell people this is going to be one of the shortest presidencies ever, because he's already a lame duck.
Yeah, yeah.
And
who's the successor? Who brings sort of Trumpianism forward? Who does that?
Well, you know, that is the biggest question, because I tell Republicans, you must realize that the dedication to Trump doesn't just lend itself to somebody else. Whoever does come next won't have that level of devotion or fandom that he's been able to establish. So yes, his vice president, J.D. Vance, has a leg up on it, if you will, but he still doesn't have that level of connection. And so I think it'll be wide open.
Okay. Really interesting talking to you. Also, can I just say, Tom, I really admire the shameless book plug there. I think the author of The Secret Life of Special Advisors, published by Bite Back, really has a lot to learn from you on that regard. That's Tom Del Beccaro, their former chairman of the Californian Republican Party and author as well. Thank you to him. We have some breaking news now on Talk, and that is that a 17-year-old and two 18-year-olds have been arrested on suspicion of murder following the death of Thomas Taylor, who was 17. He was stabbed near a bus station in Bedford on Wednesday. That is according to Bedfordshire Police. So that is the breaking news, that a 17-year-old and two 18-year-olds have been arrested on suspicion of murder following the death of Thomas Taylor, a 17-year-old boy who was stabbed near a bus station in Bedford 2 days ago. That's according to Bedford Police. If there's any follow-up on that, if there's any developing story, we will have any developing information, of course, I will bring that to you between now and 7. At 7 o'clock, Kevin O'Sullivan takes over. He's here between 7 and 9, and then between 9 and 10 is What Just Happened, when Kevin will be on your screens again with his panel, of course, with What Just Happened. We're going to take your calls, texts and tweets. After the break, we'll hear from you. We'll also hear from Kevin about what's on his show. Stay with us for that.
I didn't actually create it. My officers created it and the engineers created it.
Right.
And obviously the idea comes from overseas, Holland, where you know there's a culture of walking and cycling. And in England and locally, we need to actually make sure we handle growth sustainably. There's lots of houses being built in the country. 11,000 in Hemel Hempstead planned in the next 5 or so years, 5,000 jobs. And if we rely on the car for everyone to get there, Hemel Hempstead will be an absolute gridlock.
We need to get tough on deporting people who come to our country and then break the law. We need to get really tough, like other sensible countries do. And if the law doesn't allow us to do that, then let's change the law. And if international laws don't allow us to do that, then let's derogate from those international laws, because you don't get away with this sort of stuff in other countries. So how is it that Britain has become some...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to everybody who's been in touch, including on Twitter. And someone has taken issue with the fact that I mentioned that well, not taken issue, but added something to the fact that I talked about Julia Gillard, who was born in Barry in Wales. Graham Souness and Tony Blair were apparently born on the same day, the same year, and in the same city. They did go off in slightly different directions in life, it must be said. Bob says, oh no, Labour and the Liberal Democrats, what could be worse? I think a minority government, either Reform or the Conservatives with an agreement, might be the case. I bet you on that one, says Bob. I'm not accepting any more bets. Sorry, Bob. Absolutely spot on regarding Peter Blexley and Maggie Oliver taking on the investigation. The only people capable of doing it properly on rape gangs. Great show as always, says Woldy. Thank you. Sandy says you read out 10 different instances Labour called for an inquiry. You forgot the cake. They wanted an inquiry into the eating of birthday cake. Sandy, it was more than that. You know it was more than that. It was Boris Johnson made the rules and then broke them. It wasn't just about eating birthday cake. It was about being a hypocrite. And the inquiry found against him, and I'm afraid I agree with most of the inquiry. I know you don't, Sandy, and that's okay, but it wasn't just about eating birthday cake. It was a lot more than that. Fiona says Peter's social services and local authorities were also culpable during the child rapes. A national inquiry should focus on rape and child sexual exploitation committed by organised gangs. And Angela says, I'd rather a criminal investigation for the grooming gangs and the ensuing cover-ups led by an overseas crime investigations team. She also says gas usage for electricity has been very high all week. I've checked that out with the NESA app. I'd rather no links with the Chinese communist regime and local elections being cancelled or a dent into democracy. We'll certainly be talking about that as time goes on. Those local councils have, I think, until next week to decide whether there's going to be an election or not. On the eco side of things, why is the government putting all their eggs in one basket, says Mabel. She says many flats and small homes do not have space for air source heat pumps, but instead of investigating and making electric combi boilers more efficient, they try coercing us into installing those. And just a bit of reaction to my darts joke, which is what I said that Luke Littler made me do 180 on my views on darts. Avery says that darts joke was a proper grown out loud moment. I aim to please. Heather is in Girvan, and Heather, I know when Donald Trump becomes president in 10 days' time, you'll be a happy person.
The trial was done by audio, not televised, because I watched it on NBC News. And
are you happy with the outcome, Heather?
What they said throughout the trial, and I can't remember what they said, but when they give him that unconditional discharge from in the courts, and it was recommendation by the prosecution counsel from the district attorney in New York, and he wasn't there personally in the courtroom.
Do you think justice has been done, Heather?
Trump. He was in Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah. Do you think justice has been done, Heather?
He can get on with his inauguration in 10 days' time, and he is going to be the first president of the United States of America to have a felony.
Yeah, and do you think that will you be happy when he's president again? Do you think America and the world is going to get better as a result, Heather?
Yeah, definitely. I've always been a big supporter with Donald Trump, and I've always a big fan of Donald Trump. Ever since I was a young kid, throughout my teens, because like when he was a young businessman and I was in my teens, I really fell in love with Donald Trump because he was gorgeous and he was dynamic. He is a dynamic.
Do you still think he's gorgeous now, Heather?
Yeah, of course. He's still got his youth, by the way. And
at 78? At 78? Can that be called youthful?
Well, he is better than Joe Biden.
Is there much of a competition, would be my question.
I mean, Donald Trump, for God's sake, he plays golf a lot.
Yeah, he's a healthy man. He's a healthy man.
I don't live far. Well, I don't live far from Donald Trump's golf club.
Oh, right, okay.
Turnberry.
And will you be watching the inauguration, Heather?
Oh, with bells on.
Great stuff, great stuff. Well, we're going to have full coverage of it here on Talk as well. Make no mistake about that. That was Heather in Girvan. Thanks for your call. She gave me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Barry is in Norfolk. What would you like to say, Barry? I think it's maybe renewable energy you give us a ring about.
I don't know about Norfolk, but I'm in Poole in Dorset.
You're in Dorset? Well, that's quite far from Norfolk, isn't it? I don't know why it says Norfolk on my screen.
Oh, no. Down in Poole in Dorset.
We'll get that changed for the next time you give us a ring. Right, you're in Dorset. Okay. Well, wherever you are, Barry, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say about renewable energy?
Perfect, Peter. Right. Why doesn't the government take up tidal? At the moment, we use about 2.2% of hydro energy for getting electricity.
Okay.
But tidal's predictable.
Yeah.
And according to government official figures 2 years ago, they predicted 16% of the UK's energy could be tidal. I mean, I live in Poole, down with the rich and shameless, but the entrance to the harbour takes billions of gallons of water through. It's 60 feet deep. With hydrogeneration down there, it could produce a phenomenal amount of energy.
Yeah.
Nuclear produces 15%. Tidal predicted 16%. That was 2 years ago. We import 10.7%. We could scrap the import literally on using tidal generation. And the thing about tidal, they know where it's going to be for the next 30 years. Okay, there's 20 minutes here between the change of incoming tides and outgoing tides. I'm not just saying about Poole, but rivers and all that lot. California, where those fires are, 23% of their energy is tidal.
Okay. I've learned a lot from this, Barry, and it does. I think that's a very legitimate question in terms of the fact that we are an island nation. There are plenty of coasts, plenty of coastline. Why don't we just use a bit of tidal energy? Why do you think there's a resistance, clearly, to this, and that we're not doing more of it, Barry? Why do you think that is?
According to the government, it's cost. But at the end of the day, solar panels, when they first came out, per 200 watts were about £800.
Okay.
Now they're about 55 quid. It's only technology that brings it forward. And if the development was done into it, then that development would reduce the cost. That cost would then come back. And if we could get 16%, even 10% of our energy from tidal.
Yeah.
Tidal's done by the moon and the world.
Yeah, the gravitational pull, yeah.
Exactly that.
I've learned an awful lot from this call, Barry. You clearly have a lot to say, and you've got good knowledge in this. And I have some good news for you, Barry. There's some really good news. You're going to love it. Do you want to hear it?
Go on.
The good news is that the team behind the glass have changed the line in front of me on the screen that says Barry from Dorset.
Perfect.
Excellent. Listen, thanks for the call. Really appreciate it, Barry. Very, very interesting.
I mean, all I'm saying is, the tides happen.
Yeah, of course, and we should harness it. We certainly should, Barry. I think it speaks an awful lot of sense. And thank you to Chris in London, who's given me a ring as well. This is on the gangs, the rape gangs, paedophile gangs that we've been talking about. Chris, what do you think should happen?
Well, a national inquiry would take too long, and it wouldn't have immediate effect. What it needs is a national investigation, and putting Peter and Maggie in is a jolly good idea. But it needs, I believe, it needs an ex-military commander, high-ranking military commander, to sit on top of it with a very, very well hand-picked KC that can advise him of the legalities as they go forward, and it must be able to compel anybody they want to appear before them to give evidence under oath.
Yeah.
And I would also immediately, in the National Crime Squad, I would deploy them to the towns where it's been going on, because I'm sure that somewhere up there, right at this moment, it's continuing on.
And that's the great shame, isn't it, Chris? That is the great shame, that of all the talking that has been done, of all the inquiries that have been done, of all the different government actions and methods and different recommendations that they've been talking about, we know, I know, you know, everybody watching and listening to this programme knows the horrendous reality of this, the horrendous reality that this is continuing right now.
Exactly. Now, the second line of that would be all these guys that have been prosecuted already, got to jail, been released, rescinded their Pakistani, or in other cases Somali, because there's been quite a few. I mean, it is a majority of Pakistani, but there's...
there are other ethnicities involved as well, absolutely, yeah.
They need to be rounded up. If they've rescinded their
citizenship,
their dual nationality, they go into a detention centre that's a proper detention centre.
Chris, I've got to go. I think that's not a bad idea. I've got to go because I've got to talk to Kevin O'Sullivan, but please give me another ring. I'm on tomorrow between 10 and 12 and on Sunday between 10 and 12:30. So please do give me another ring and I'll see if we have time to chat to you again. We have a little bit of time to talk to Kevin O'Sullivan. What's coming up in your show, Kev?
Hard to put those people into detention centres. They've already served their sentences. You know?
Yeah, indeed,
There's not much you can do about it. If the courts opt to let them stay here, they stay. Anyway, what are we doing tonight? Yes, Elon Musk plotting to oust Keir Starmer. I've been thinking about this. You see, why it's not just Labour that are rattled by him. It's not just the government. All of the Westminster politicians are very rattled by him.
Do you know why?
I know why.
Tell me.
Because they live within a genteel world of parliamentary formalities.
I read a columnist the other day, right, in quite a major newspaper. He said Donald Trump doesn't understand politics. Right, the man who's just he's just won a second term. Okay, he understands something to do with politics. Elon Musk and Donald Trump are changing politics. They're changing the debate and the terms and the way that people debate.
Exactly right.
And the establishment is very worried by this, Kevin.
Exactly right, and I like it. You know, as you say,